Hello and welcome to the 23rd Revolutionary Strategy Series live stream. We have a very full house here today. Who do we have? We have all the way from sunny, warm, tropical Utah, the Varninator, Derek Varn.
Hi.
How are you, Derek? How's it going?
I'm okay. I've been sick for like 2 weeks.
Oh, Jesus. What type of sick now?
Lung infection.
Oh, Jesus.
Ooh.
Are you on like super hard antibiotics?
Not anymore, but I was, yeah.
Mm.
And we're going to finish up talking about this McNair crap, right?
We finished the book last week, Derek, so today we're going to talk a little bit about Cockshotts critique. It's probably the last one. I hope this is the last one.
It would make sense if it was the last one.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you're feeling better, Derek.
Thanks.
We have all the way after surgery to remove her what's it called, the twins that are born together, conjoined twins.
Yes.
Lexi has been split, and for medical reasons, Lexi has been moved to a very far away part of the country. Lexi, how was the operation?
The operation was a success, Tom. What can I say? I enjoyed hanging out with Sophie for like 2 months. It was really amazing, and now I'm in a very, very cold place in the suburban shadow of New York, and and that's about it. And
did you have to learn to walk again?
Nah, I got all that in muscle memory. My side aches a little bit, but I've lost a few pounds, so that's good, right?
Yeah, a lot of dead weight. Okay, so next we have.
Hey. Oh, you are gonna get into trouble, Sophie. So I talked to Sophie about the Cockshott piece. So even though she's not here, I think I'll be able to represent some of the things she was thinking about.
I have to take my chance at hitting her while she's not here, so she can't respond. Okay, then we have all the way in Spain, sunny Spain, is Puya in Madrid. How's it going, Puya?
Pretty good, Tom. Pretty good. How are you?
I have a question.
Not so sunny right now.
Does the rain fall mainly on the plane?
No idea. I think so, probably. I mean, the city probably doesn't take up that much area, so.
I think the irony is, I think, like that it doesn't. The plain, like the middle of Spain, is actually quite dry and arid. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I got all the good ones here today. Kyle, how's it going?
All right, Tom. All right.
Okay.
We got some sun here. The snow's let up a bit, so it's good stuff.
That makes one of us.
What's the temperature there, Kyle?
Kyle.
Temperature?
8 degrees Celsius.
Not too bad.
That's not that bad. Yeah, that's fine.
Not bad. Yeah. Not bad.
In London, I think it's probably colder than that. It's 10. Okay, now moving on. Derek wasn't here last week, but Derek, we finished the actual book. Neither was Puya or Kyle, but we finished the last 2 pages of the book. So today, before we started, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we were discussing last week, whereby I don't know if I was making the case for entryism in non-PR countries, but we certainly discussed that about that type of strategy, and I've kind of come to the conclusion, listening to myself editing it, that kind of fetishizing this idea of PR, that when you read a book like this that is, I think, so political based, it talks little of, the social element of things. It talks about, the high political strategy, that you kind of forget about, like, what it is that causes, political upheaval to happen. in the UK, for example, it wasn't like when the Labour Party came up, it was PR. The party was it was a one first past the post. But what was the cause of the Labour Party coming up was something happening within society. So I know this may seem like a totally obvious point, but it's something I felt like I should come out and discuss before we go on. Is that like if we to look at the American case, we sometimes see ourselves, the only possible thing that you can do is entryism into the Democratic Party. But really what it needs is something has to come out of society. And like, what is, I think that's something that's missing in this book a lot. What do people say?
Well, like, I just want to maybe echo where I think the PR conversation was coming from last time. The reason we were focused on this proportional representation versus first past the post, it's in a way kind of a charitable move to McNair, something maybe protective of his framework, to be like, yeah, I guess I could see where this framework would make sense in a political context that isn't like the one that it's written in, or the one that most of us, in fact, all of us last round, were reading it in. So in the United States and the United Kingdom, this doesn't apply, but maybe it makes sense somewhere else, was kind of the conversation we were having.
Yeah, but it also doesn't make sense in the context of which the historical examples are pulled from. So where does it make sense?
What do you mean by that, Derek?
Well, I mean, you're trying to modify. It's hard to, like, I was actually re-listening to our discussion about this recently on Stitcher, believe it or not. You came up in my feed and I heard my own voice. But what I mean by this is, like, even when some of these goals were stated outright as part of the strategy, they couldn't be done in the context in which they were tried in the Second International, beginning of Third International. They also can't be done in the United States or in Europe. The proportional representation and getting past first past the post and alternate voting systems would mitigate some of this, but this is also a world strategy, so no, it doesn't.
Right.
Like, I mean, I came away from this book thinking, I read this book the first two times and thought it was immediate, like it helped clarify some of my thinking. And when I read it this time and really thought about it in the larger context, I get more and more frustrated with it. Like, I find myself agreeing with Cockshott on things. I don't ever agree with Cockshott on things. Like,
it's true.
Like, it's just
here. So just let me roll you back a little bit, Derek. You say that it didn't work in the context kind of where it was tried, like, but
it wasn't true. It wasn't like, okay. McNair seems to think the reason why Lenin, why the Bolsheviks got all murky in a lot of these their attempts at republicanism is pretty much because of political decisions. But when we kept on talking about this, even in the context of other chapters of the book, it really wasn't just political decisions were why the Bolsheviks were making these decisions. Like, there were thousands of other things going on. We went down a rabbit hole about like the Germany fetish, went down a rabbit hole about productive capacities, went down. I mean, it just becomes like, well, how could you even have gotten to the political question? You never got there.
Yeah, but
it never was.
But like, I agree with you. Like, he doesn't get into that. But like, what we're talking about, I think more specifically here is like his actual final strategy, not so much his explanation within the book of why previous strategies, why he doesn't talk about the economics so much, and he's making all these kind of political points. But like, we can still take. I still think he would agree, from having heard him talking about stuff. I think he does agree that, it was a gambit and it didn't work because it wasn't ready and you had to exploit the peasants, blah, 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 and the way you go down the whole Stalinist route. Mm-hmm. But like, so the thing for us is like, is this strategy today a viable one? Not so much like, you know, because it was never tried in the Second International. This wasn't tried in the Second International.
Fair enough, but it's not
from the Second International. Like,
say again.
It's a way of learning from the Second International that, look, this was the, like, not even this was the elementary error, but this was the fundamental like problem with their whole way of viewing things. Because if you read the book consistently, and, you know, I don't think McNair often makes this point specifically, but I think if you really look at the underlying logic, the fatal flaw was the merger with the Lasallians very early on, and that came to fruition in World War I more than anything. So it's basically a book that is, quote, orthodox Marxism, quote, that says that orthodoxy has always been perverted. So yeah, it's pretty important to differentiate that the strategy being advocated was not tried by Kautsky, was not tried by Lenin, was not tried.
Even more so though, like, see, I don't know if I say that like the orthodox Marxist position wasn't tried, because did not Marx and Engels support the SPD after the merger and what they were doing?
Yeah. Yes, they did.
I don't want to use the word orthodoxy in this way, really. Like, I was just trying to show how it undermines itself. But more importantly, well, Engels was full-throated. Marx had reservations, but he didn't, you know, go, no, this is the wrong way. Don't do that. I'm publishing Critique of the Gartha Program now. Like, so, yeah.
I mean, and Engels was full-throated, yet he also wrote Critique of the Offer Program, which in some ways is even harsher than Critique of the Gartha Program. Which, you know, in the Critique of the Author Program was all done in private letters to Kautsky. The issue, though, is like you can always move the fatal flaw back, but eventually you move the fatal flaw back to the entire edifice of Marxism.
Yeah.
Like you're going back to the core. But to talk about a little bit about the strategy of the end of the book, I found it very I have found a lot of that strategy to be catch-22y. So namely, like, you need to do this to change the electoral systems to make it fair to be able to do this. You need to do this to build the workers' movement to merge with to do this. Like,
but Derek, he doesn't mention PR in this. That's us. And I would say that he would make the point that it has to come out of society, like the Labour Party came out of society, that the new movement will have to come out of society. Like this fetishization of PR is something that I did. He never mentions PR in the whole book. Never mentions it once.
I think you're still trying to save. I think you're still trying to save him from himself.
McNair has a virtue in that he recognizes a sort of limited domain of political agency. But on the other hand, this virtue is also a vice, because he thinks that you need to orient towards the existing left, because that's the agency that you have to get together. That's his point of view. He argues for it fairly passionately and logically in debates with, say, Chris Croutrone, who says that the left is dead, and other people that say we need to just take it to the workers. You know, McNair is pretty clear about saying, no, we need to talk to the left. We need to get our house in order, which, I don't know, he at least delineates between popular agency and, you know, quote, militant agency, you might say. Even if I think he has like maybe the wrong point of view for, you know, I don't know if we should be talking to the left in the way he's saying, but he makes the case much more clearly in other places. But I would say that this is more of a problem than something we just brought in, or even something I've been saying throughout the book that, well, obviously, like, you know, you need the movement out of society. I don't know if we disagree with that, but I think his point is to point to the agency that we have as radical and intellectuals and as, you know, as Marxists. He has, you know, an article called Go Where the Marxists Are. You know, he's interested in Marxist agency, not necessarily just popular agency.
Yeah, like, I don't think I'm trying to rescue the theory. I think I've been kind of highly critical in points of it. But you know, McNair never brings up the point of PR. That's just simple as. Now, maybe
True.
and it's not a problem for Marxists to discuss political strategy. You don't have to bring the fallen fucking rate of profit into your actual political strategy. I don't think Marx and Engels, when they were talking about this stuff, were going, oh yes, but what about the Lades in fucking Manchester when they're talking about political decisions of going this way or that? They're linked, but they're not like, you don't have to constantly. I think that this book, I think it makes a very clear strategy. I think the difficulty with it is, where is this fucking, the same old thing. Where is this fucking movement coming from? Like, McNair comes out of a milieu of trots, MLs. Like, you're not saying he's an ML, but you go to the meetings and they have these adjacent people there. That's his world,
But he was a burnout from the gay liberation movement.
Well, he was a trot burnout first. He was a trot.
Well,
before he was ever in the gay liberation movement, I think.
He went and worked in. So?
Yeah, he worked. I was talking to him. He went and he worked in like a car factory in the 70s. He was doing his degree in Oxford in, I think, history or law, and he left and he went working in like some British auto plant, and then he went to East London and he worked in a canning factory using these old 1910 canning machines in the 70s. They used to be steam powered, and they actually.
That whole strategy, he did that whole strategy that was big in the 70s that both Maoists and Trotskyists did, of going back into the shops, which was an ultimate. It was that, by the way, was like one of the biggest waste of time, historically speaking, that has ever happened. Which is probably why that background actually probably explains the kind of hyper vanguardism of this book, which it is. The reason why it's a hyper vanguardist book is not because like he believes in like a democratically centralist. I mean, he kind of does, but he defines that differently. Authoritarian party, but it's because he thinks that the intellectuals of the left are what drives the movement.
But that's not different than what Marx and these boys said.
Marx is no, actually, it is different than what Marx said. I was actually just going through that. Marx actually said that the movement should be led by the advanced parts of the proletariat. He did not speak at all about professional revolutionaries. That talk comes in with Engels.
Right. Luxemburg is pretty good about identifying like this sense of the vanguard. And even though no one can come up with a coherent Luxemburgian politics or whatever, like, I don't think that kind of changes that. What I'd say that orthodoxy is perverted in some way, that it makes reference to, the heads of Marx and Engels and then distorts something. That's what I'm getting at, Derek. Is that?
But he barely mentions the vanguard in the entire book. There's only one point where he doesn't.
You are reading explicitly. Don't read it explicitly. The reason why he cares about the left is because he cares about the intellectual thought that's going to lead the movement. That is the vanguard position. The fact that he doesn't use that language is a tactic.
That's a big claim.
Like, oh yeah, it's not like what the hell kind of party is he a part of?
I mean, I think that just descriptively from what we're talking about here, that I would agree with this. Read, Derek. Like I think that, like, even if you're very charitable towards him, the way I try to say it is that he's very interested in the distinct kind of agency that militants can have, which I think that is healthy as far as that goes. However, at the whole time we've been looking at this book, we have noticed, that yes, he's thinking about the social in some way, but he's not writing about it. Those aren't the relevant variables here.
And this strategy doesn't deal with it. We have to pull it out from nothing. Like,
so the strategy with the social element at all, you're saying?
Like, I mean, this like it assumes it's already there. I mean, I think Lexi and I can speak to this because we started tripping over this when in a political project when we were trying to debate, like, well, where does this workers' movement come from that we're going to merge with? Since like, where is this large social support that we can lead? Like, it seems like we are like the cart's way before the horse on this. And that's like when I say vanguardist, I'm not even meaning like that this is like some kind of elitist. No, I think McNair's virtue is his version of vanguardism is actually inherently democratic. I mean, like it, but it's still about the political tactics and the leaderships and the intellectuals who are leading the movement. Like when he's talking about Bakutinists, you know what he's really talking about? He's talking about tailism. And I realize this because I'm doing another research project on this like very thing right now. But that's what it is. Tailism. Now we use it differently, but originally it meant to be led by the working class instead of leading it. It was all right. So you get tailed by the working class, and it really comes up in the Second Internationals because the communist movements can't attract people from the liberal and social democratic ones, so they start blaming the workers.
The Third International?
The second and third. It happens in the second too.
Okay.
Like, did they start blaming the workers? Well, so we need to leave them because they're going to just the workers have to maintain their own identity. Like you even hear this in ultra left critiques of like worker identity and stuff. The workers have to maintain their own identity. They're not self-abolitionary, which gets them back in a feedback loop with reformist movements. So we have to get out in front of them and lead them. Now, Marx did actually think something like that, but he thought it was going to be led by the advanced parts of the proletariat who were the most educated, but within the proletariat itself. Tailism actually kind of does the opposite thing. It says that the party apparatchiks and professional revolutionaries should be the ones leading. They have the leisure time to do it. They aren't, and Kautsky.
But like, sorry, I was going to say, like, in the book, he talks about how the party, you will have a division of labor between the party and the members, the leader and the members. And the way around this is to have it all extremely democratic. But like any movement, you're going to have leadership roles. Like if you look at the SPD, it's not like that they weren't probably full-time leaders like Babel and all these guys. Like, but so. But
the leaders are
not hardly vanguardism in the sense that we know it as in Leninist vanguard, centralized bureaucratic stuff.
Well, there's a different social background there. There was a really fierce trade union movement happening, and yes, the SPD was involved in building it, but without the workers fighting, it wouldn't have existed. And so there was, I don't know, it's more believable that in a time like that, if you had representatives and there's a fighting movement, that the movement can keep its representatives in line better. It can, quote, control the bureaucrats better.
Right. The reason why the reason why you can't do this now, and this has been an issue with the democratic structures of these groups, is the groups are small. There's no mass movement for which they can be accountable to. There's no one to hold them accountable. And there is no strategy in this book to get to that point. You already have to be at that point. And so you kind of bulk up the vanguard. When I say vanguardism, this, but I've also seen this applied. It just turns into Leninism every single time.
But who are they that doing it?
The left. Yeah. But the left. You want to talk about this? This is about the unity of the left, is it not? That is the central point of the strategy, which includes primarily Leninists.
But it's not about like the flaw in like trying this stuff amongst all the existing left is that these leftists that are LARPing around, imitating fucking Robin Hood from 100 years ago, they're not anything. They're not a new left. They're not a new movement. They're not the intellectuals of the movement. They're people who like fucking putting a flag of the Soviet Union up in their bedroom. That's who they are. And that's why you can't say that the strategy is wrong, because these LARPers who tried it out all end up like rehashing the same bullshit, because this is just like we said early on in one of the episodes, it's like it's the latest fad diet for Leninists.
Well, but then you have a left that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But that's not what McNair says. You have to actually take McNair at his word.
What does he say?
He argues for left unity, and the problem of left unity, not we have to create the left to unify with, not that we have to create the worker movement to merge with. Those are already assumed to exist. So what you work with is what exists now.
Well, I think yes, there's the Leninist faction, and those are maybe like some of the loudest on our social media pages, but probably like the least, I don't know, the least important, I suppose. Like what else you have is people that are involved with literally the DSA and the Democratic Party and that sort of thing. That's probably more of a significant push, and a lot of that comes out of trying to apply McNairist, or like a vaguely McNairist strategy, at least this like dirty break kind of thing. Like that, like those are people that look at our system, look at this strategy to a degree, and say, well, we got to go where the left is, where the Marxists are, and that's in the Democratic Party, and that's in the DSA. Maybe we can use the DSA as a sort of proto party within the Democrats. That also comes from this line of thinking. And I don't know, did I say that we're more or less important than Leninists? But you also have some like really I don't know, you have some like third position radical flake off sort of left neo-Kauts that see basically now having come through not just Leninism, but a kind of like pro-democracy, let's look at the Second International kind of thing, a kind of like, let's recover the lessons of this tradition that are still kind of like maybe like push towards an autonomist or communizer position and are like resisting. Because when I'm still to some degree trying to recover something from the Marxist political tradition. And maybe this asks more questions than it answers, but I'm not sure. Like I think it's at least given me like this discussion, this like long running discussion about this convinces me that like these kind of three options of abstention, some attempt at opposition, and coalition, those are still like the main options. It's just that it seems like having an independent political agency would be very kind of temporally bounded within a social movement, like, and that's like maybe a different position than than is intended by opposition. It's supposed to be a patient, long-term position.
Okay, I've a question for you, Lexi, Derek, whoever wants to come back in this one. If he had said something along the lines of, in those points, there's no, say, it's, I think, what was there, 14? Let's say he puts the 15 point in and says, like Marx and Engels, there's no fucking point in going into these crummy organizations until they become something real, and that we shouldn't LARP about, and that we should work on our theory and our whatever instead of doing this LARPology. Would we all think we would think that the strategy is then good? Strategy then valid?
I would say that the strategy might be good, but it's premature. That we don't actually. That we don't know what the social organizations are enough to discern what the actual current spectrum would be, and thus where to be within it. Because this does assume a kind of continuity with the historical Marxist internationals, that there's still some kind of continuity there. And maybe there is in Britain, but I highly doubt it.
Well, Derek, when I interviewed McNair the first time, I said to McNair, I said, like, I just read Marx in a fucking room. I'm a weirdo. I said, I never went through these organizations, and I'm delighted that I'm like, I kind of think like they should probably all die and something new grow up. What do you make of that? And he laughed and he said, yeah, you're probably right. Like, the only thing he said that was good about the existing ones is that they know how to organize, like they know how to do some stuff, like run meetings and stuff like that. That's like literally what he said.
Okay, so I guess I just come away thinking like, and maybe when we get into the Cockshott, this will make more sense, because some of Cockshott's critiques actually resonated with me a bit. That because that movement doesn't exist yet, this would end up being kind of oligarchic. It really would. Like, and I've seen it because I've also seen it attempted, and you're right, it's because of the LARPers. But I mean, like, I'm going to be honest with you, before 1848, Marx was a LARPer. So, yeah. I mean,
he's kind of a weirdo.
Yeah, I mean, he was an academic weirdo. He would have just been a weird Hegelian commentator. We wouldn't have cared. That's
not LARPing, though. He wasn't like, he wasn't essentially being he wasn't being a Jacobite and saying, "Oh yeah, everything fucking they did is correct. Let's be Jacobites." Yeah,
that's true. What he was
being a Jacobin.
He's being part of these underground, like, revolution.
Jacobin, yeah, sorry. The Jacobites, are they the Scotch?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah,
no,
but sorry about that.
No. But he was part of, these sort of like revolutionary, like, radical reading groups, basically. I mean, he was sort of a leftcom more than a LARPer.
Yeah,
like, even he forms a communist league.
But he was hanging out with LARPers. Like, let's not mince.
Yeah.
Let's not mince words here. He was, and in fact, like, what he gets for with a lot of the. What he gets in trouble for with a lot of the
you got a loud crinkle. I don't know what that
Derek,
is.
I don't know what you're doing. Yeah, but
what he gets in trouble for with the First International is like he doesn't LARP enough during 1848. And I say it's LARPing, it's an actual war, but they never stood a chance of winning. So like like the factions Marx was with were doomed. Yeah. And you get the kind of feeling that Marx sort of kind of knew it.
Engels went out there. He had cred.
Yeah, Engels went out there and had cred, and Bakunin and Wagner went out there and got cred, but they used that to attack Marx later. I mean,
they dunked him. Those dunks got like 100 likes, which is the 1840s equivalent of 1 million.
Yeah, I mean, so it was. I don't have chips. I have Fisherman's Friend.
Quality, sweet quality.
So the issue with this, I mean, I think that the Marx thing is interesting, because Marx to me was hanging out with people who wanted to be Jacobins and was smarter than them. Like that's what he's really complaining about half the time, is like, you guys aren't the revolutionaries. Like we need these people to actually sign up with these actual existing social movements. But he was also interested in bringing those social movements about, and had reforms designed to bring those social movements about. Those political reforms. Read the Communist Manifesto. Those 10 planks. Those are designed to create the social space, not political space, for the communist movement to emerge.
Oh, both, really.
Yeah, but like if you read the Communist Manifesto's actual planks as a way to bring about the political steps of communism, you're like, that just sounds like liberal reformism.
Yeah.
I mean, but what it's about is social space. And yeah, I mean, Marx changes his opinion on a lot of those too over the next 30 years. But it's still like Marx is thinking about this not purely in a political way. I mean, even if you look, you read the Hal Draper book on how he wrote Capital. He starts off wanting to write a theory of the bourgeois everything, and starting off with the bourgeois state, and he just realized that economics was more and more important and harder, and never even got to the other sectors of society he wanted to write about, because he never got through working through the economic part. But he wanted to have a theory of revolution, a theory of state, a theory of all that. That he stated that. He just never did it.
But like, I've been reading Gary Teeple's Marx Critique of Politics, and like in that, I don't know if you read that, Derek.
No, I haven't.
It's very well worth reading. It's actually a brilliant book. Yeah. And but in that, he makes the case that like Marx got like I think it was like in his critiques that he went through that was the last one. Let me just check the book. Wasn't the philosophy of what's Hegel's one?
The philosophy of right.
Yeah, I think in his final critique, like Tieper makes the point that he seems to have come to the conclusion that he had done enough on the state, and that he had like that formulation of what he was going to do was before he actually had finished his study and stuff, and that capital was the bomb, and that he didn't want to actually go right about the state then, because he saw that the state was a secondary function of the underlying economic system, and this, that's why he didn't get into it too much. Later on, he went and worked on other stuff, but like that's people making the case. I think he makes a convincing case for it. But anyway,
I would be fortunate because he never wrote that book. So
yeah,
good.
I mean, it would at least explain why he gave up on that, because he does. I mean, like, but my point is like. I just feel like this is putting the entire Marxist tradition, and I want to be fair to McNair on this, actually, going all the way back to the SPD, maybe putting the cart before the horse, except that when they did it, at least in the late 19th century, there was a real movement to come out of, and we don't have the same thing.
Okay, so like this is so we're making I think we kind of all agree about that, that I think that just because this strategy won't work now doesn't mean that the strategy is wrong. It would mean you would need, strategies only work under certain circumstances, poker or chess, you do it under certain circumstances. The point would be that if there was a social radicalization like the 1940s in America, where there's loads of strikes happening, could something emerge? Would this be a good strategy to apply in that scenario? These big movements, they don't come along every week. They're not always there. And I think this idea of Marx hanging around with Jacobins and kind of slagging them off, that's today's Leninists or Maoists or whoever the hell you want to call them, whichever, take your pick, left comms, blah blah blah. They're stuck in a thing that has not worked and failed. And at least McNair is trying to come up with fucking new or rehash and look at history to come up with new ideas. To be honest with you, that's unusual on the goddamn radical left.
You know what I think we need? I think we need a little Puya, a little Kyle, and then we can move on to Shaft Blaster.
But what about the PR? What about PR? I want to talk about proportional representation for an hour. How about that? We talked about that for an hour.
Really, it was just a way to be nice, really. Be like, yeah, I mean, because we actually have communist parties listening to this in PR countries, and I think they'll probably grok what we're saying there. They'll probably understand that, the opportunity that they have as, agents within their electoral structure isn't the same as the opportunities that we have. But we could have easily read one of these Jacobin articles about first past the post that says, actually, it's a good thing. If we can get, a socialist party on the ticket, then it's one of the only two options. Great. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that argument.
I don't believe it.
It doesn't sound very good to me. But
nice to live in that world.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with Tom that there's no I mean, I don't know if you were saying this, but that there's just you should adapt your strategy for the situation that you're in. And there's no just strategy that's useful under every single circumstance.
It seems like the whole exercise here is extrapolating from a certain political trend in the 20th century, and it reaches some interesting conclusions. But the question of whether that trend or that pattern is going to be relevant going forward is an open question. And the book doesn't really engage with that, because it's just trying to say, here's the history of the movement, here's the history of the parties, here's my analysis of politics. And you end up with this, admittedly, kind of like an extrapolation that doesn't really match the circumstances very well.
Yeah, he doesn't deal with how like these movements emerged out of the conditions that they were in, and that's like a big problem with this book.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's taken as its assumed knowledge um, for the audience he was writing for, and that has issues.
We want to start in on Cockshotts critique because I think we get into we touched on some of these already, but otherwise we're going to be here all day, and I've had my say now. So I just thought I was actually surprised at how that like I thought a lot of this was more prescient than I thought. There's some stuff that also horrified me, but
Yeah.
We don't ask for too much.
Should we do the ass end first because that's where the good stuff is, or should we just start off with the tanky stuff?
I think we have to start with the tanky stuff. He broadly says that he thinks that it's a good piece of work and that the head towards a kind of a Kautskyan where you don't go into coalition with bourgeois parties would be a good thing. But then he kind of slags them off about what he says about USSR and China. Let's read. This is. Let's just read these. I'll read these. But this is a quote he takes from McNair. Under the Soviet-style bureaucratic regimes, there was no objective tendency towards independent self-organization of the working class. Rather, there were periodic or episodic explosions. But to the extent that the bureaucracy did not succeed in putting a political cap on these, they tended towards a pro-capitalist development. The strategic line of a worker revolution against the bureaucracy, whether it was called political revolution, as it was by the orthodox Trotskyists, or social revolution by the state capitalism and bureaucratic collectivism theorists, lacked a material basis. Okay, he extends the argument to apply to orthodox Stalinists who have explained why real Stalinists were not able to organize the opposition to the restoration of capitalism. Does anybody have any idea why the Stalinists weren't able to organize people to oppose the restoration of capitalism? Anybody have any ideas out there?
Well, the next thing he says is even kind of more egregious, right? That okay, so it makes a point that it focuses exclusively on the USSR and post-World War II Eastern Europe. That's actually valid. But then it says it ignores China and the Cultural Revolution. And then it goes, okay, so we just made a point. You're being Eurocentric. But if you read J.R.H. Getty, there was a lot of working class participation in the Great Purges. Isn't this an objective tendency?
So the Great Purges are good because they're working classly popular.
Yeah, that's the argument.
Yeah, there's an argument. I'm sorry. Yeah, Puya?
I don't think he's saying that it's good. I think he's just saying, or that he's just being Eurocentric. I think he's saying there was working class
right.
It's like this is wrong because of this.
It's not saying that the great purges and the Cultural Revolution were necessarily good, but they could be indicative of a positive, objective working class tendency within socialism against the bureaucracy and towards some kind of working class power.
Which I believe in the case of the Cultural Revolution in the early half, but in the for him to take Getty and just say that the purges have popular support. Getty's argument actually indicates no, it wasn't. They weren't essentially organized, but actually, it was a lot of it came from popular support by mistakes from middling bureaucrats. That's Getty's actual argument.
Right.
Who is Getty? Who is Getty, and why do you roll your eyes when you hear him taking Getty's arguments?
Getty is the scholar the scholar most interested in documenting the purges, but also saying that they were not purely Stalinist machinations. They weren't that there was a bunch of objective conditions going on. Some of them have to do with middling bureaucrats making quotas. Some have to do with popular resentment against the bureaucracy. Some have to do with miscommunications and overheating the system for production quotas and needing someone to blame.
Yeah, and so Jared Ketty in the Russian historiography is like one of the first people, or like one of the earliest to do what's called like a revisionist read of the Soviet Union and the purges, and he got to go into the archives, and kind of take a look at the narratives that were being put forward by conservative historians like Robert Conquest, and try to make heads or tails of how much power Stalin actually had. One of the sad things about Getty's research, because Getty doesn't strike me as a tank, even though a lot of people read him that way. And we had one of his students, Sean from Sean's Russia blog, on Swampside very recently, and it's clear that when you look at Getty's research, that the Stalinists are doing a deeply dishonest read of what Getty is trying to do with his research, and kind of doing what a lot of people were accusing Getty of. People accused Getty of, by taking some of the agency off of Stalin, who, still when you finish, looking at Getty's stuff, it's clear that Stalin's signature is on everything. Like this guy still had an inordinate amount of authority inside the system, and I don't know, I think it's still compatible with the idea that maybe he had the most concentrated power of any one man in history. But Stalinism was a system. It's not just him. And when Khrushchev, lies about things after Stalin dies, it's not, he lied about how harsh and horrible Stalin was, is that he made a fetish of Stalin in order to defend the whole system.
Right. That's what Getty's argument is. But what's funny is people turn Getty into Grover Furr.
Yeah.
If he's defending the purges as a democratically, popular supportive act against an overly bureaucratic system. And the reason why I'm inclined to I like Kyle and Puya's charitable reading of this, but I also know the party that which Cockshott came out of. So it's hard for me to not know that they supported the purges and the Cultural Revolution. So, and kind of in a very simplistic way. So this swipe here, you could take it. There's two reads, and then I'll let you. One read is true. I think that there isn't enough read of the material situation in the Soviet Union, and then there's another read where and also the purges and the Cultural Revolution were kind of democratic and popularly based. So shut up.
But is this an objective tendency is the question that Puya and Kyle are kind of seeing that Cockshott is trying to answer, that, this is its own mode of production. What he's ultimately trying to get at is that class struggle continues under socialism, the old Stalinist line, and that, the purges and the Cultural Revolution, not merely being the machinations of people at the top trying to destroy all of their rivals, just like any good managerial class, navigator. Okay. Aside from that, the reason that you don't see working class, what he calls trade union struggle, he doesn't call it, class struggle really. The reason why you don't see trade union struggle is because class struggle ends up looking like the purges or the Cultural Revolution.
Right.
So so what he's saying is that this kind of idea of working class tendency in it is basically, working class people using this thing to get even. That's kind of what it sounds like a lot.
Working class people bureaucrats to get even against socialist bureaucrats, not capitalists. So
or whoever the fuck, or the woman walking across the street, you turn them down on a date, let's snitch on her, or whatever the fuck. Yeah.
And by the way, it still will end in capitalism. But
This is not.
But wait. Sorry, but say that is or tendency of anything is a joke. It's a joke. To say that working class. To say that it's
I got Robotom.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So to say that like people doing like revenge stuff within purges or within other stuff is a sign of some kind of working class like movement or anything. It's a joke. It's a goddamn joke.
Well, yeah. Also, there's all kinds of objective problems this leads to. Like, because the second thing he's talking about is since the abolition of private capitalism is bound to remove the old class struggle between labor and capital over profits. Let's get into that for a second. This is the idea that this sentence is why a certain school of Trotskyists and Marxist humanists and left comms consider the Soviet Union state capitalism is because the classes still exist, but labor and capital are no longer struggling over profits because they're collectivized. So there's no reason, since there's no struggle over profits, there's no trade union activity. So socialism is bound to remove class consciousness. But if there's a bureaucratic element of it, that class consciousness is going to be purely revenge, and like that's the point too. That's like he's actually trying to draw out the logic there.
Like I have a huge problem with this sentence. I have a huge problem with this argument.
I think Puya wanted to respond to the previous.
Yeah, go ahead.
I forgot what I was gonna say, but I think that I forgot the comment that I was gonna reply to. Okay, just go. Yeah. Oh well, I don't know. Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Fire ahead.
I might be able to say something. Yeah, I think he was saying that like that McNair, like he could be reading the situation incorrectly because like McNair is looking for social, like for working class participation, but then, or for working class organization, and then Cockshott says, yeah, if you get rid of the working class and capital, what's working class participation mean?
Yeah, I mean, so you have to basically say that there was an abolition of class consciousness, although that actually does make point one also kind of contradictory with point two, even though it's justified in point two. Like, but yeah, this is basically not so subtly Maoist argumentation.
That was kind of my read as well. Yeah.
I mean, it may be like he may be a Maoist. Like, you may think that these things are great, but like, I don't think he's like making a normative argument.
It's impossible to tell. But what I can say is like point one and point two seem to root into each other, but they also contradict each other, because if there's working class participation, but there is no working class anymore because there are no profits, then how can there be working class participation in point one if point two is valid? And if point
it doesn't make any sense. Like, they can't be. They're mutually exclusive. Like,
I've got something I really want to say about this second one. Like, he's saying basically, imagine like we had a communist utopia, okay, and we got rid of classes, and we had a wonderful life, and then these fucking whatever bureaucrats decided to sell us up the river and try and bring us back into capitalism. If it was a brilliant, amazing utopian socialist society, do you think people would have any inkling to fight for it? Seriously.
So from what I understand of Cockshott's point of view on this, like, he argues that the Soviet population did not support the end of the Union, and yeah, they weren't on board with that. That
it was basically a capitalist conspiracy, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, the Soviet Union is extremely popular in the post-Soviet states.
But he says even at that time, like, basically the population of the USSR was outmaneuvered and had their country stolen from them.
It's not wrong.
I think it actually is wrong. Believe it or not, I think it's objectively wrong. Like, and I
Well,
also
maybe, but like, I think maybe there might be like, I think maybe like after quite a while, they, after they actually got it back, they probably regretted it. I don't know, but I don't know what like the time, like, because eventually they, like right now it's very popular. So, but I don't know, maybe like right before the end of it, it was not.
From what I remember seeing, he was relying on polling data prior to the end of the union
Well, I've
to
seen that
justify
too.
that.
I've seen that as well. So I don't know if that's just a quirk of the polling data.
No, I don't think like I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so either. But I know that there was hunger for reform and there was hunger for even market reform, to a degree. But
but I also
I'm not
don't think the Soviet Union's repopularity was immediate. Like it
No.
actually took about 10 years for you start seeing that.
But I have seen like votes where people like oppose the dissolution. Like I think there was a vote before the dissolution where it was
Well,
unpopular.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, like I imagine that. I don't think that the Soviet Union was popularly dissolved. I think the popular unrest that led to its dissolution, however, was real. You can't, like those two things are actually discrete issues, and the argument that Cockshott mates have to conflate them. It's also typical Stalinist defensive line. The issue that we have now is that capitalism after the end is really was really also problematic. And I'm also going to say, like, the period of nostalgia that people have for the Soviet Union and what they want back is not the period anyone fucking remembers. It's like
Stalin.
It's not even Stalinism. It's like Brezhnev period seems to be the most popular, and like only people in their 80s would remember that. So like it's a projection. It's just people know that capitalism sucks. So
Well,
No, Brezhnev was 70s. Brezhnev was 70s. You could be 60 and remember Brezhnev.
yeah, like the old people, that they got some experience there.
No,
Like
like
the 50-year-olds and the 6-year-olds.
no, but the point here is like if it was really something that the people loved, and so maybe the majority didn't want to get rid of it, but if they loved it, like if it was a properly communist or socialist society, it would be so fundamentally democratic and connected and everything that it would be easy for them to have actual real social struggle to defend it. And there wasn't real social struggle to defend it.
no, there
No.
Just
wasn't.
saying you prefer, just to
No.
say you prefer one way or the other, that's easy. I could say, oh yeah, I prefer
No
not to
one
have
was fighting
Brexit.
to keep it up. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And that means something fundamental. It's like, is it Rousseau has some quote about, like, excuse the old terminology, but like the savage and would fight for freedom to the death to defend it, and the imperialists would say, well, colonizers, well, we could give them a higher standard of living, Rousseau is like, freedom is like fucking so important to them, they're willing to die for the damn thing. Like, and if you had a communist fucking really
Right.
brilliant communist society, it would be so easy to organize an uprising to defend against these bureaucrats. The fact that that didn't happen is a sign that there wasn't a love of it. They may have thought they preferred here or there, but it wasn't like they were fighting in the Spanish Civil War or the 1917-18 Russian Civil War. There was none of that.
Right.
It just rolled over.
And that's why I wasn't just going for the low blow by saying this all collapses into capitalism anyway. That's like relevant. There's no like really defensive, objective tendency, what have you, as part of the class struggle. There was popular opinion, but in terms of a class struggle, like no, people welcomed some kind of change, and were hoping that people that said, oh, if you introduce those changes, you'll lose the whole thing, they hoped those people were wrong. And well, I know for a fact, because if you read For a New Socialism by Cockshott and Cottrell, or Sophie has nicknamed him Shaft Blast. Anyway, if you read that, Cockshott argues
Shaft
that
blast.
Shaft Blast. I'm glad somebody appreciates this.
I have no idea. That went right over my head. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'll tell you when you're older. The
Okay,
point is,
thank you.
like,
My
the point
13th
is,
birthday coming up. You think he'll tell me?
okay. So in For a New Socialism, Cockshott calls the Soviet Union and China examples of Marxian socialism. It's the terminology he uses, but that instead of democracy, you had a cult of personality that somehow took the place of democracy, because that's just a merely political form. I'm talking about the economic form. The economic form was Marxian socialism, and somehow the economic form of Marxian socialism has a hot swappable political seat where you can throw in one-man dictatorship or full democracy.
It's like that was such a, that was so silly of them, wasn't it? Just to put the dictatorship role in. They should have went for the full democracy version.
Well, fortunately,
I
you
mean,
can just hot swap them. You can just swap them out.
I mean, capitalism. Sometimes you have like, sometimes capitalism goes into like fascism, but it's still like the capitalist economy.
But is that just a choice? Is that just a simple choice, or is it a material fucking thing?
Well, more importantly, though, capitalism has an alienation between political and economic spheres that would make that proper to capitalism. That's fine. Communism, at least on paper, in the maybe not in the Marxist sense, but certainly in the Marxian sense of being the communism of Karl Marx, was not just looking for an abolition of the alienation of these spheres, because feudalism arguably is like that too, but in this higher form communist way. That you can't just make this artificial fetishistic separation between economic life and political life. These things are deeply intertwined, and to treat them as different, like modular options.
The reintegration of the reintegration of the economic to the political is emergent in a social or communal life. That's what that fucking means.
Right.
So,
I think this might be a little bit too determined, like a little bit.
I think you're an engineer and thus a Stalinist, and we're gonna have to shoot you for you. That's what I think.
Oh my god! Leave Puyo alone. Leave Puyo alone.
I mean, like a little bit, like I don't think like this like level of determinism. It's a little bit like could go this way, could go that way.
But you could see why I would object to it, couldn't you? Like, considering
I think there's an argument
presented here, and then how important democracy is, in other parts of Cockshotts' work. Like, it seems like, how could something really be like a socialist system and function with either of these things? I guess that's the, that's the rub. Like, wouldn't you need like some kind of fundamentally different kind of institutions than the USSR actually had? Like, was the Soviet Union like meaningfully socialist in a way? And what does that mean? Like, because I don't think you can have socialism without democracy. And I know it's like a canard, but I don't see how there's meaningful, control of the means of production.
Well, I mean, let's. I mean, I think there's this other thing too. Of course, the argument, like Kautsky in the 1920s, is valid to say the CP represented petty proprietors when in power. Well, there existed some truth to the extent that as long as petty peasant production existed, it created wings.
Derek, start again and slow it down. Start again and slow it down.
This point's interesting. This, of course, like the argument of Kautsky in the 1920s, is it valid to say that the CPs represented petty proprietors when in power? When there is some truth in the extent that so long as petty peasant production existed, it created wings within the CPs who defended its interest, Bakunin,
Bukharin,
Gomulka, Dung. But these were just one wing, and in most cases, they did not come out on top. In the USSR, private peasant agriculture was largely eliminated by collectivization. And during the 40s, the 50s and 60s, the state farms expanded at the expense of the collectives. In Poland, after 56, let me find this in my version of this. Employing actresses the petty proprietor rings did not come on the top.
Whoa.
Yeah, I just skipped. The petty proprietor rings did not always come out on top, but that was generally not the case. In the DDR, the SR, the CSSR, and the Bulgarian state or collective agriculture was the rule. The crisis of the socialist system, Poland aside, was not generally precipitated by demands of petty proprietors in agriculture. It was the identification of state bureaucrats with petty proprietors. Petty proprietors is an unconvincing throwaway phrase, not justified by any argument. To which I say, horse shit.
Total and utter horseshit.
Yeah.
Go, Kyle.
It seems like a total misrepresentation of McNair's point, right? Because I don't think McNair was saying that the representatives of the petty proprietors directly triumph, but the fact that the proletariat in these countries had a very weak social basis meant that political strategy by the socialists was determined by the strength of the petty proprietors, right? Like they had to adapt to that reality.
And the other thing that is that McNair hinted at, and that this is actually obscuring, is the petty proprietor class produced most of the leadership, not just the leadership that he's listing. Mao is the descendant of petty proprietors. Stalin is the descendant of petty proprietors. That is their class origin.
Right. So yeah, I think this is it just reads to me like a really bad faith, or it's a straw man kind of of McNair's position.
And like you could do pretty good, backing up of a concept of, organizational property. This is something that Eric Olin Wright draws out in a concept of rents. He actually approaches it slightly different than McNair, but the critique kind of serves a similar purpose in both of them. You could even say that McNair's version of it, doesn't fold it into class enough and might give, Leninist forms of organization a pass. But at least he attempts it. At least he's trying to do something like this. Cockshott doesn't want to engage with that stuff. I don't know how much McNair fleshes that out. It's true that McNair, is light on the social argumentation when it comes to these things.
Yeah,
I forget if he touches on it.
I don't think McNair is like literally talking about petty proprietors.
No?
Not like literally.
There's a similar argument made by Horace Lee in Bread and Authority. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But is the point that he's making is like that, like if you wanted to get ahead under the under the USSR system or whatever, you had what did you become? You couldn't become like an entrepreneur or some kind of petty bourgeois shopkeeper. You became a bureaucrat, and the bureaucrats were disliked, just like the business people were disliked under capitalism. Is that not McNair's general point?
That's part of it. I think the problem is like McNair actually kind of mixes three arguments into one, but he doesn't want to. He doesn't want to take this full-throated, because a full-throated version of this, the petty proprietor argument, is the state capitalist argument, and one of the reasons why, one of the things that the state capitalists will say is that because of the collectivization of exploitation within the system, the entire Soviet Union actually worked like a small shop.
There is an alternative formulation, which is a sort of like bureaucratic collectivism as pre-capitalism, or as like tributary mode of production kind of analysis. This is the explicit position by Robert Brenner, actually. Derek, when we did our episode on Fitzhugh on Swampside, I was looking into this, and yeah, Brenner has what I think is probably the winner, is that it was this weird kind of modernized, like bourgeois but not capitalist. I don't know if it's bourgeois. It's alienated in a capitalist way, but maybe not strictly bourgeois in the way that we understand in capitalism. But but it serves as a form of a bridge to capitalism, as a transition to capitalism, essentially. And so you have like a parallel kind of exploitation. You don't have to call it capitalism in order to accept that, essentially, to accept a petty proprietor analysis. And I would say that, like, I'm sorry to keep going, Puya, but just to flesh out my point about Lars Lee and why I think that this argument is being made not just about the state bureaucrats, but about the peasantry, is that a lot of the state's origins are during the Civil War, where like a lot of the proletariat is being just decimated, and mass democracy and to the degree that it was actively pursued at all, meant an orientation towards peasants and towards the mass of the people, the majority of the people in what would become the USSR.
I mean, that's what the mass line stuff in Mao is about too. And like in both the USSR and in China, the proletariat was a small part of was a small part of the population. Like the vast majority. I mean, in some ways, until almost the 90s in China, the vast majority of the population was peasants. So that you have that, like waving that off is like, well, that was also true for like most of the 20th century and particularly in China, which is the model that I'm thinking that Cockshott really wants to glom onto.
Right. And Lars Lee basically puts some of the foundations of the Soviet state in what he calls the food supply dictatorship that forms during the Civil War in war communism. And that this was essentially performing an old tributary function of providing central authority enough to prevent famine. That's what a lot of tributary, not even central authority to like a high degree, like, because there was a lot of room for smaller warlords and this sort of thing, you might say, but like just enough stability to prevent the worst from happening. That's the function that, like, I don't know, basically Lars Lee seems to argue that this is a foundational moment in the Soviet state, and that's where the petty proprietor, even more so than being all managerial bureaucrats, even more than having to keep the specialists happy to some degree, is that like orientation towards the peasantry in this really weird way. And so like the zigzags about the actual peasantry that Cockshott is talking about, it is true. And it's hard to say that it was just a peasant supremacist state or something when Stalin liquidates the peasants.
Not at all. It's a response to the peasant power. It is not peasant power directly. That is absolutely not the case.
Yeah. So it is a really difficult argument to get a grip on, but the abstract category of petty proprietor, at the very least, can give us some broad class category that covers all of these dynamics, because what it isn't is a proletarian state.
Okay, moving on. He goes into a few points here that I don't think are that interesting. One of them, he turns a bit like, for somebody who's not here, he gets all mad MMT here about deficit financing and the right to currency.
All he was saying is that, you could take the same budgetary equation and look at the other factor there, tax, rather than government expenditure. That's all he's saying there. It's a basic mathematical point. But like what he's doing is saying that McNair's definition of, the common core of the bourgeois state is kind of weird and is trying to avoid a confrontation with the concept of democracy, which I think, he really does start getting at something.
Say that again. What do you mean?
Well, let's look at McNair's criteria for the bourgeois state, because I do sort of think that that's interesting, and hopefully, I won't. Hopefully, we won't spend the next three episodes on this, but you know what I mean. Like, let's just scroll up and take a look at it.
3 episodes. Whereabouts? This one. 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Oh my Christ.
No. Yeah, just okay. So Cockshott quotes McNair as saying, "The inner secret of the capitalist state form is not bourgeois democracy. Rather, it has three elements. One, the rule of law, i.e. the judicial power. Two, the deficit financing of the state through organized financial markets. And three, the fact that capital rules not through a single state, but through an international state system, of which each national state is merely a part." And so, all right, ignoring point two, because again, why focus on that part of financing?
What about the armed body of men? It's weird he left that out.
Well, like the thing is that McNair is arguing what makes the bourgeois state distinctive. He's not looking at the bare definitions for a state. That's basic to the category of state here. And it is addressed in his idea of extreme democracy or whatever. So I kind of think Cockshot's a little, it's not like nothing in the book is set on that.
Hey Tom, are you gonna school Cockshott on deficit spending?
It looks like Tom stepped away for a moment.
Okay. Because I bet Tom's head blew off when Cockshott was talking. The state needs the money to through taxation. The state needs its money.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
I was like,
I don't think what Cockshot's saying there is actually incompatible with MMT though, right? He's saying the power to tax is more important than that, and in particular, the power to levy taxes in money rather than in kind. And part of MMT is levying taxes in order to control the money supply.
No, that's totally MMT. But there's another part where he says that the state needs to tax to be able to deficit spend.
Right. Without tax revenues, there would be no way to pay the interest on the national debt. And without the obligation to pay taxes in domestic currency, there would not be the ability to issue money that was generally acceptable. So it's the first part there that I guess MMT would be like, oh, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. But the one part where he's like, they need to be able to levy taxes in the money. That's straight out of MMT. And I think that's correct too. To be able to establish a currency.
Yeah, I guess I can't respond to that directly. More along the lines of it's like, I don't know. This is like a minor quibble, and it just serves to show like how McNair's definition is a little weird. And I don't know. I
feel like sometimes McNair is just like some of the things he says, I feel like he's just like, I don't know why he says it.
This is supposed to be the conditions. This is supposed to be a conceptual understanding of what underlies all bourgeois states, fascist and liberal, or otherwise illiberal and reactionary, but all of the states where the state form has been to a great degree remodeled for for bourgeois class interest.
To defend McNair on this just for a second, he's saying that these are the secret form of bourgeois democracy. I mean, the bourgeois capitalist state. Deficit financing of the state through organized financial markets is unique to the capitalist states. The power to tax in kind is not.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it seems to be a similar problem to Cockshott's criticism of McNair for not talking about the special body of armed men. Again, that is a general property of states. It's not specific to the capitalist state form.
Right. And but what Cockshott gets upset about is, there's no reference to governance and the norms of governance, because, and I do think that there's something here, because when you look at illiberal illiberal capitalist states or straight up fascist capitalist states, like in fascist Italy, the Grand Council of fascism had electoral apparatus and stuff. And, there are these perverse forms of, I don't know, more or less parliamentary forms that you get of what will end up being called here oligarchic institutions, electoral institutions of some kind. It's not, I guess, if you're looking for the bare minimum, I guess that's not perfectly true across the board. But for the most part, even when you have really extreme dictatorships, they take on a kind of presidential form or, at least electoral pretension, I guess. I don't know how y'all feel about that. I think he's onto something here.
I can't see how that's unique to capitalism, though. And that's if you're going to deal with the essence of the bourgeois state and not the state, governance was not unique to the bourgeois state. And while you might have a point about the way those forms always play out, it does seem like it's very hard to have a monarchical bourgeois state. I don't know why you can't tell me why, though. I don't have neither you nor Cockshott nor me. I actually agree with you, but I don't have a reason why.
Right. So, no, same. And there are Marxists that try to derive this from the very capital form. I forget what that's called. What's the state derivation debate or something? And I haven't hit my level up on bong rip to get there yet. So I haven't touched that. But then there's
also try to derive the state from capital.
Yeah, abstractly from MC M prime. Yeah.
No, that's interesting.
It is an interesting idea,
Yeah.
But I wonder.
It.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a nice Rubik's cube. I'm not sure that's gonna tell us what we need to know, but what if it did? That would be crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Maybe.
This is why we can't shoot the engineers yet. Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, exactly. When we, I don't know, you can look at stuff like the July monarchy, right? And how that fell apart because it wasn't compatible with bourgeois power. I don't know. Yeah.
And there are weird states like Britain where you have quasi-ceremonial monarchies that still have some governmental functions that still exist in capitalism, but those are really weird. And
yes.
They also still have some weird feudal elements hanging on in their form of capitalism, like lords.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
They had no land reform. There was never land reform in England.
Never land reform, yeah.
Most farmers in England are tenant farmers. They're not actually landowning farmers.
There's also absolute monarchies still.
Yeah, Swaziland, I think. Is it?
Yeah,
but here, Derek,
Saudi Arabia and
is Saudi Arabia properly speaking capitalist? That's a real question. I don't know. I really don't know. Internally, not externally. It functions in the world market as a capitalist state in the competition with other states. But
it doesn't, though. It doesn't. It's just it just sells oil. It doesn't produce anything else.
Yeah,
it's literally it's a monopoly. But I think internally there is shops and something. I was talking to a guy from United Arab Emirates the other day.
Feudalism too, though.
United Arab Emirates that place is definitely capitalist.
Yeah, but I was talking to him, and he was saying that I think it was his father. His father was works as a small shop, selling clothes or something, a tailor or something like this. And they had some guy come in and asked him, "Oh, how's business going?" He said, "How's business going?" And he was like, "Oh, actually, it's not going very good at the moment." And the guy was he was like a spy, and he was secret police guy says, "Okay, I'm writing you up a fine for 500 quid for actually talking down the economy." So I think it is. They are kind of fairly capitalist, if totally messed up at the same time.
I mean, it looks rather capitalist,
but it's weird having been there.
So Bordiga's criterion for capitalism was that agriculture gets down to 5%. Right here we have agriculture at 2.6%, We have industry at 44.2%, services at 53.2. So that's GDP by sector, I guess. So industry and services, that's the big sectors.
Yeah, capitalism.
The GDP is enormous. The surpluses are huge, and it's not just oil revenues that have been like increasing and contributing, even though petroleum is important enough that the rest of the economy is called the non-petroleum sector. So
yeah, and I mean, I don't think you can have like a GDP that high just from petroleum. I mean, Iran is like the largest petroleum exporting country, and that's like, or it's the second largest, and the GDP there is not very high.
Yeah,
or it's like medium,
but they have massive.
Saudi Arabia.
But they're massively prevented from developing. I think they have much less exports than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia are off the charts, man.
Saudi Arabia is one of, I think, top 20
and it's per capita. Remember as well, like, you know, per capita Iranian exports aren't probably close. They're probably like, I don't know what the figures are, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're a fifth of Saudi exports per head.
Well, I know Iran is the second largest exporter.
But having spent a lot of time in the Middle East, I will say that what's weird about those societies is like they import capitalism in, like, and I mean that like literally. Like if you go to Dubai, Emiratis aren't working shit there.
Like, well, they usually work like government jobs.
Yeah, they all work in like the government sector, or they're like still kind of in like quasi nomad, that like 2% of like nomadic. Like everybody else is coming in from the outside. Like modernity, like capitalist modernity is imported there, and like Saudi Arabia is not that different. And that's what makes those societies kind of weird, because like they function like capitalist states, but they literally bring it in like whole cloth.
No, I think they import their labor force.
Yeah, they do.
And like I think most of the like it's kind of like weirdly like racial, and like the heaviest like racial laws were like if you like they make sure Arabs like get better jobs.
Yeah, they do.
And then like so like I'm pretty sure like Arabs like own most of the businesses, and like or they work at a government job which is high paying, and then they import all their labor from India and Africa.
And there's their management from Europe and America.
Just to speak to how we got on this topic, like, Saudi Arabia, absolute monarchy. Do they have electoral activity? They have some virtually powerless municipal elections. Like, I think
they're less democratic than the DPRK, which is saying something.
No, for real. Yeah. Leninism tends to take more electoral forms than this. So I think actually what McNair is getting at is that the common core of the bourgeois state, doesn't necessarily have to take what Lenin thought was the purest expression of capitalism in politics form, like which is the bourgeois republic or what have you.
Well, I think there's a little bit of like, it's more likely that it'll take that.
It is, like, it's not necessary. It's not part of the common core of the bourgeois state. It's the dominant form, you might say.
Yeah, like I don't think it's like a, like I said earlier, it's like it can go this way, or there's a little bit of chance.
Yeah,
I have a treat for you all here. This is No Woman, No Cry on Saudi state television. Anybody want to hear it?
Why not?
I want to fucking hear this. I can't hear it.
No woman, no cry. No woman, no cry. Aye. Say, not remember when you used to say, hey, the government down, inflation down. Over let the home is thinking with the good people we need.
ولتفاصيل أكثر عن النص.
That's fucking awesome. I wish I had some hash.
What is 7 minutes of it? Some of the dancing in the audience. You see these guys here? Look at these guys. Unbelievable. Fantastic.
That's some Galabea action.
I mean, wow. I didn't know I needed that, Tom. Thank you.
You're making me miss living in the Middle East, and that's hard. So let's go back to this text.
Yeah. All right. So the point we're getting at here is that perhaps McNair is right that the very basics of the bourgeois state, are they does not require the stuff that Cockshott wants to talk about. However, I do think even if it's not the very common core of the bourgeois state, the tendency is clear to have these pseudo-democratic bodies, which I might add happen to be, the only forms of like continent-wide, society that have any pretense to democracy, that even like try to leverage that and use that as their like kind of, if not foundational myth, then an adoptive version of that myth. Because Cockshott goes where I go, and he goes to the Federalist, and he makes that basic opposition between democracy and republic that you find in Aristotle's critique of the old ancient Greek constitutions and typology of those constitutions. And the whole idea of the United States.
Did you read?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, why don't you read this paragraph as a lead into it?
Oh, sure. I mean, I want to make a little bit of a deeper point, but basically just that, like, I don't know. I just want to stress before going into this conversation, because nobody in the conversation is saying this, that the only forms of broad democratic institutions that we've had that have stretched from across a continent, more or less, are these form of like deceptive, anti-democratic, oligarchic, bourgeois, Republican forms. This is the only kind. And so like these critiques are good and insufficient. I think you'll understand why I'm framing it that way. Anyway, so what page are we on here? The key. Okay. The key is, all right. The key is to replace the illusory idea of all power to the Soviets and the empty one of all power to the Communist Party with the original Marxist idea of the undiluted democratic republic or extreme democracy as the form of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And this is McNair talking, by the way. The present task of communists and socialists is therefore not to fight for an alternative government. It is to fight to build an alternative opposition, one which commits itself unambiguously to self-emancipation of the working class through extreme democracy, as opposed to all the loyalist parties. This is Cockshott talking now. This is superficially correct. Certainly in impetus, it goes in the right direction, but it contains real ambiguities, which only become evident when he lists his demands. When he does, then McNair makes a complete hash of it and shows that his conceptions of political democracy have completely failed to break free from bourgeois republicanism.
Bing, bing, bing.
I'm going to quibble here and argue that the phrase democratic republic is wrong from the start. It couples two quite different ancient models, those of Athens and those of Rome, state forms, which are radically distinct in terms of the degree of popular power that they permitted. The republic is Rome reborn. It is senatorial power. It is presidential power, the first magistrate, the political form of the dominant imperial state. It is no accident that the slave-owning classes of the United States adopted a republican constitution which took Rome as its model. The social democratic movement should, in republics like the USA, Germany, and France, be seeking to overthrow the republican constitution and replace it with democracy. In bourgeois monarchies like Britain, Sweden, or Holland, to raise the slogan of republicanism rather than going straight for democracy places you no further left than radical liberals.
And I think he's right. And honestly, I think this problem goes back to Marx, which I don't think Cockshott even realizes.
Well, McNair realizes this and frames the book as such, as to create a sort of vagueness around this in a way. And like, this is something that a lot of Marxists don't talk about that clearly, is how Marxist politics change. when Marx is more of a Republican in his early years, and then kind of says, well, we need to go beyond this, following the sort of course of, when you look at the history of the French Revolution and, the stuff with the Paris Commune, what have you, like of 1871, the one that Marx saw, there's an evolution in Marxist thought.
Yeah, there is, but that weird conflation of the Greek and Rome, of the Greco and Roman model actually exists in both. And I'll tell you why. The dictatorship principle is a Roman Republican principle.
Yeah. And
so importing that into the kind of Grecian radical democracy, except this time truly radical, like it's not just, the elite classes of the Greek, the Athenian Republic, it's everybody. Or at least all proletariats, and then everybody once the economic modes are changed. You still have a Roman model, a Roman imposition of power with a class magistrate that we all struggle with. That ambiguity in the idea of the dictatorship of a class, which is like almost a contradiction in terms, except that we kind of see it in the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, sort of. It haunts why the Democratic Republic is squished together. I think that does go back to Marx, and I think we do struggle with it because it's like, what do we mean? What do we mean by a dictatorship? Because dictatorship is a magistrate position, and we're arguing against the need for that.
Yeah, there's a sort of how do you say?
Are we arguing against it?
Well, I mean, if you believe that in the Athenian democracy position, and in a classless society, that's the other thing. Because Roman republicanism, senatorial and magisterial power are classed explicitly. You can only be in them if you are of certain classes, and you become a certain class by being in them. So a classless society cannot have those kind of divisions. And that's like, when anarchists get talking about the new class, if you look at this Roman DNA to this, they aren't wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of Aristotelian kind of politics is looking towards like a sort of middle class ultimately. This sort of old bias, and this isn't even just from Marx. This is from the way that the American Republic sort of develops and takes on these democratic pretensions, and probably consolidated best in Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, which Marx was a student of. And I think it's all tied up in the fact that, when you're talking about democracy or republic, the old thing that like Montesquieu was getting at, like, or whenever the great Baron Montesquieu came up in the debates around the Federalist, he was always invoked to say, look, you can't have a big ass republic. That shit's going to fail. That it just, life doesn't work like that. It's nice for a city state, but you need something more, authoritarian and less representative of even, the best in society or what have you. You're going to probably need something monarchical if you want like something from sea to shining sea or something. And the classic argument of the Federalists is that, well, you can have these little laboratories of, more pronounced electoral activity, but you could create, what de Tocqueville will backdate, later as a sort of aristocracy of lawyers. It's like a pseudo aristocracy of lawyers. And that will allow the cream to rise to the top. Therefore, you can have national affairs sided by essentially like a lawyer class. And that will like hit that Aristotelian sweet spot where you don't just literally have rule of the rich themselves and end up with monarchy, but, you don't even have like full military control. You have this sort of like, middle class, like, of sort of civil servants that will end up becoming, well, I mean, they didn't even think of it as middle class. They thought of this as like, these are the great people in our societies. This would be the natural aristocracy.
Yeah, they thought of it as the natural versus the artificial aristocracy.
And that's like right, exactly. And even Jefferson, who's supposed to represent this opposition as current to the Federalist, was basically bought into that vision too. And so that sort of Jeffersonian reaction to the Federalist that never overcomes the Federalist ends up sort of defining a lot of the spirit of what I would call American democracy. And it's a myth, of course. It's not democratic in this Aristotelian sense. And, maybe the way that it adopts democratic norms is opportunistic. But there's nothing like this. There's nothing, like the only comparable institution is like the EU, maybe. And the EU is toothless compared to the US feds, Like the EU is like an Articles of Confederation kind of deal compared to the power that the federal government of the United States has. Like, I don't know. I think it's telling that Cockshott, who's a Scottish author, is pivoting to talking about the exact things that I talk about in my own context, thinking about, the government in the country that I live in. I think it's telling that he goes here. It's telling that Marx learned so much about democracy from de Tocqueville or what have you. Like, I don't know. It's all just hitting me right in my world, where McNair, for the most part, is really talking about something more remote. This gets at some fundamental issues that I had with McNair's presentation of extreme democracy, and essentially Cockshott calls him on not having an alternative to representative democracy. That all power to the Soviets, no. Basically, we have to rely on representative forms. I don't know if McNair ever really says this, but
it feels like that's what the Republican model is what we're arguing for. Particularly when you look at his other proposals, like the his Council of Nations and stuff.
Right.
That's representational.
I don't know. When Sophia,
the radically democratic, if we were truly radically democratic, it is dangerous. It is, and this is where the Republican argument has a point, and what I think one of the reasons why Cockshott doesn't lose it, because if we were truly radically democratic, the self-autonomy of ethno groups, nations, is eradicated. It would be. There's no way around that. Why? Because you have to represent those interests separately from just the masses of people, and the masses of people will be represented by the dominant culture of the area, which will become democratically enforced, because that will be the assumptive norms of the rules. So if we had a world system today and we were all things, we would be dominated by China and India.
That's assuming that you don't have any, it's just a pure, crude democracy.
But that's what we're arguing for.
Yeah. So
are we not even in Rome? They still had other people in Rome. They had sortition, but they also had
pointed out that the Democratic Republic is a hybrid system between Athens and Rome, and if you want real extreme democracy, you cannot mitigate it. You are mitigating it by imposing a outside system that is fundamentally different from it, and then saying it's the same thing. And it's also a class. To do that, you have to have leadership classes and stuff. You never hit classless society.
Well, the thing about extreme democracy, what people are in the classical tradition, advocates of extreme democracy are seen as underneath wanting tyranny, because everyone knows that an extreme democracy would simply collapse into tyranny, and people didn't trust advocates of extreme democracy because of it.
Right.
That might have been a classed kind of thing, but there's maybe something to this that, because even when I'm talking about trans utopian, pipe dreams with Sophia, we're talking about maybe what a future communist government could look like. We still kind of feel like that there would be maybe a directly democratic house of something, and then a more world republic representative body or something. I don't know. It's just hard to imagine extreme democracy throughout the world.
you also have checks on democracy. You would have to have checks on democracy, otherwise, like minority positions such as your own,
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be eradicated.
I mean, potentially. Maybe we have like a beautiful society of tolerance and whatever, but maybe we only have it for gender and race hasn't been figured out and you know, or what have you.
What have you? I mean, like, but we run into this when we talk about the national problem. Like the national problem is where this all shows up.
Yeah.
Because like, what do you do? I mean, like the Stalinists get into this. Like, you want to accept the autonomy of nations, right? Well, what do you do when the Ukrainian farmers don't want to give you their fucking grain because they're starving?
Like, you killed them all. You killed them.
I mean, and then you also turn. I mean, Stalin literally after that point turns his back on Lenin's national policy and goes to Russification. That actually is what happens.
Well, this is again the Federalist that makes a position arguing for minority rights. Ironically, the minority that it's mainly most interested in protecting is the rich. That's what it's most interested in protecting. But the overall argument does make a certain case for liberal individual rights. It's hard to stomach that it's articulated specifically in terms of the rich, but you would have to take it seriously. You know, if you're for, self-determination of, nations, or even if you're for like, an element of women's autonomy or queer autonomy or what have you,
right.
like basic questions of majoritarianism.
Which, I mean, I think and McNair does take those things seriously, coming in center of the queer rights movement. To me, I'm not actually siding with radical democracy here, except in so much that we're supposed to want a classless society. But for me, this actually points out some fundamental things that we have not worked through as socialists, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of why I wanted to start with the ass end of this essay first, because I actually think the discussion that Cockshott has here about radical democracy is super important and very interesting. But because of the crazy shit he says up front, I find it impossible to take his formulation of it at face value, even though I think it's one of the best versions. It's one of the best conversations on the subject available. I haven't seen people make the Aristotelian point that, this is all, elections are aristocratic instruments, right? Do you ever hear that? No one really applies that consistently. And I would like to, kind of get more into, understanding why Aristotle thought sortition was more democratic, understanding how sortition, do we really need, that much of a political specialist class? Wouldn't a lot of sortition maybe liquidate some of it?
Well, sortition incentivizes being competent in everything because you might be called to do it.
Cool.
Yeah, which is like a virtue. Like that is democratic virtue.
That's cool.
But Aristotle feels that that's impossible. Like Aristotle doesn't think every cook can govern because of their natures, right? Like, so that's it.
Yeah. Aristotle thinks that, slavery is sort of natural and defensible.
Natural, justified, yeah.
And hopefully, in our utopia, we educate everybody very well.
I meant to say earlier, Derek, that if you want me to kill the engineers, I can get a cheap Ryanair flight over to Madrid probably tomorrow and do it for you.
Hey, wait a minute. You have to at least let Puya design our complex systems model. Come on.
Puya, have you ever heard of that TV show 24?
I mean, if you think about it, Tom, there's a uniform probability distribution of finding me over the area. And if you take the differential area and integrate over that, what's the probability? What's the probability you think you'll find me?
How many Iranian chemical physicists are in Madrid? It should be fucking simple.
Oh, man.
Probably not many.
Right.
I think one.
So, are we saying then that we like? I definitely.
Actually, I know there's one.
But there's one.
But I know that actually. I know that for a fact.
So, getting back to this, does council communism does not even, like, none of these forms go full on towards this sortition method? No, no major commie has ever argued for this. That's true, isn't it?
No. CLR James was a big advocate of sortition.
I was in a CLR James library about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah. Neat.
That's Marxist humanist.
That's pretty cool. I don't know. I'm glad there's a library named after him. I mean, still a dystopia, but cool. Like, yeah, so it's a great minority of the socialist tradition actually does this, because socialism was associated, especially in Europe. I mean, I really throughout the world, I guess, aside from maybe like a few places where the mass vote was introduced from the right. But, it's associated with struggling for electoral rights and democratic freedoms.
It also is, I mean, if you look at its origins, like if you look at the Communist Manifesto's origins in 1848, is also explicitly associated with, I mean, like the early Republicans and the socialists and anarchists couldn't even tell each other apart. Seriously.
Yeah.
They thought they were all on the same side. And for like a brief shining moment in history in Europe, they were for like a day. I mean, and then they lost, and then they were on the same side again. So,
we were talking about majoritarianism a second ago. I wanted to say that I don't think it's like that much of probably going to be that much of an issue on political problems, but I think like in the economic planning, like sometimes I'm concerned that like some places won't get developed enough.
I am too.
Or like
yeah, definitely.
Or like I think that's like I think that might be like I think maybe like the planning should be like we should just like calculate that and like you know what I mean, like there should just be an algorithm for that.
So I mean one characteristic of Athenian democracy though was that elections existed occasionally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually for generalships.
Yeah, generalships. Yeah.
It ends up being a weirdly military society too.
Yes, which is consistent with McNair's call for a universal military service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's consistent.
And yeah, like you can't really have a consistent democracy in the Aristotelian sense without like everybody kind of being on board with military service. Because as we've already established, it's like you kind of have to be a little bit of everything, including a soldier. And of course, you have to defend democracy, which is, the Athenians didn't manage to do.
I mean, you are talking about the only society that lasted less time than the Soviet Union.
And the only one that's talked about more, especially more per year, like prorated per year, like cultural impact.
If
you're talking about like flash pans in history, like you got the Soviet Union, you got Athenian democracy, like right there.
What about that? What about that? The Iroquois, or what about them? How long did they last?
About 100. The Iroquois Federation, about 100 years.
Oh, damn!
There you go.
All right.
3 of them. There we got 3.
That's honestly that's the only like comparable large kind of constitutional body I can really think of.
And by the way, was super influential on America until we scrapped it for the Constitution, because like the Articles of Confederation were actually based on the Iroquois Confederation, because Ben Franklin was big in the cultural appropriation,
well, all of the state governments, a lot of the state governments were also influenced by Iroquois Confederation kind of constitution documents.
But the Iroquois weren't sortition though, so they were just like representative, weren't they? They weren't sortition.
That I'm not sure actually. I don't know enough about the Iroquois Confederation.
I think different tribes in I think they were a representative on the confederational scale, but different tribes organized their internal tribal societies differently. I mean, a lot of them really were ruled by like consensus, and like the oldest people in the room would have a meeting. I mean, like that's real. So,
I've a question for us all, right? Marx was like, you can't read Capital and not know Marx was a classicist.
yes,
Yeah,
like Aristotle's in those footnotes all over the place.
all over the
Yeah,
place.
they'll just
he
drop
talks
Greek
about,
into the main text.
yeah, he talks about Aristotle, how the reason why he couldn't deduce value properly, socionestalary time, because it was a slave society, blah blah blah. He talks about it all over the place, right? But for example, does Marx ever talk about republic versus fucking Athenian democracy?
No,
Surely he's got to be talking about it somewhere.
I don't
no,
think
well,
so.
I mean that's what I was actually the weirdness of like the Brumaire in particular is where this comes up, because that's where the need for the dictatorship of a class comes up. Well, that's Republican, but he talks more and more like a Athenian Democrat as he goes on. Like he gets less and less faith in representational government. Like that's explicit, but he doesn't pull it back to the classical roots. It's also like how like Marxist materialism is like actually kind of idiosyncratic because it's Hegelian Epicurean, not modern, and
it's a non-utilitarian form of consequentialism. With
explain that gobbledygook. Explain all that gobbledygook.
Well, I mean, like his materialism is formal in that, and I mean that it's formal, like he believes in material forms, and that forms are material things. And that goes back to Epicureanism, and that's what he was writing his PhD thesis that he didn't finish and abandoned our dissertation on, was a Hegelian reading of Epicureanism. So like he comes out of this Marx does come out of like the German idealist tradition explicitly, but like he was in the classicist wing of it. And that informs a lot of his ideas. It also is like why he didn't take part of it's capital development. Part that's why he didn't take non-European ideas that seriously till later. Like, he thought about like it wasn't until like way after 1848 where he starts like recanting like, the progressive nature of imperialism and stuff. Like,
yeah. Are you trying to say that he's a materialist that believes in the power of ghosts, basically? Like not literal ghosts, but like corporate collective entities.
He believes in collective entities. He believes in formations. He believes like it's a completely different set of assumptions than like
it's an emergentist paradigm, you might say.
Right, and that comes out of Epicureanism. Like that's a different materialist position than like the analytic one that most of us have.
Yeah, one neuron, one vote. Right.
Yeah, exactly. They're both atomic, but that's like really it that they share. And there's all these kinds of assumptions running through Marx, but they're you have to really know your shit to know this. This is why I'm always like a little skeptical of the people like anybody can pick Marx up and get it all. I'm like, no, you can't. Like you really can't.
It could be a groovy read, and you can like you can reflect on a lot of stuff, but I don't know, just like reading anything from like a million bajillion years ago. There's a lot of context to unpack, and that's all kind of cool and groovy and potentially creative, unless you have someone that's trying to shape it towards some kind of weird philosophical life view that'll take away your agency.
Right, which by the way, this is prime fodder for. But to bring it back, like, no, Marx doesn't. I don't think Marx. I shouldn't say that he doesn't. There might be some. Whenever I say like Marx doesn't do something, someone's gonna find a letter on the back of a napkin somewhere where like he does.
Please send that to us. I do want to see that napkin.
But as far as I know, he doesn't talk about that distinction very much. Although he knew it for sure. It was like the basic fucking distinction between Athenian and Republican Roman. But the thing is about Republican Roman as the Roman model of democracy is interesting, right? Because it's a precursor to Bonapartism, in that the more democratic it gets, the more it really does follow the Aristotelian model. Like the more popular support like a single individual has, the more likely they are to be a dictator. That's just true in the Roman model. Like Caesar had popular support. It wasn't just Stalinists who make that, Stalinist Bonapartists like Michael Parenti who make that argument. It's kind of
I really love that he wrote a book about defending Caesar. I kind of love that.
It's really good. I've seen his talk on it. It was fucking brilliant.
Oh my god.
It's just like good. Parenti's talk on it is excellent.
Wow. I mean, oh god, I gotta read that just for bong reps.
I highlighted one sentence here where he goes on about the wisdom of crowds. Like, I quote him here: "There's wisdom in crowds, for the collective will contain people with many different skills and experiences." That's not why the wisdom of crowd works. Like, the wisdom of crowds is really good for certain things, like, say, estimating the weight of a cow. They're actually really accurate at that. But like, that's because people have a concept of weight and volume and they know it. But when you're talking about something where they don't have any experience of, there isn't a wisdom in the crowd.
Maybe the average person can get a crash course on something and make the right decision better than professionalized, special class can.
That's true, but the wisdom of crowds actually does have, like, when people talk about it, they miss it as blind spot is two things: either something you're completely unfamiliar with or something you're culturally motivated to not consider. Those two things, the wisdom of crowds do not play in at all. In fact, it cuts in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we could,
hopefully everybody gets taught really well.
Except the engineers.
We gotta keep them suppressed.
We got to keep them specialists.
Yeah. Dumbed down in chemical physics.
Sorry, no species being for you.
So you'll see some fella over in the corner drooling. You go, "Oh, who's that?" He goes, "That's the chemical physicist."
Oh my god!
You leave our precious sweet Spetsy alone.
Sorry, Puya. I'm going in on you tonight.
In the future, everybody will be the guy drooling in the corner.
Yeah, probably.
All right.
I've got a question for us. I've got a question for the panel. Are we all sortitionists?
Yeah.
I kind of am, but I don't know that I actually am not totally sure we get out of some kind of representational government for the reasons of respecting human difference. But I am still like, but we should probably just let it be chosen randomly by lot.
But I mean, you can. I mean, there's plenty. You can still advocate for it. Like, you can have a party that advocates for. Even in the U.S., like, most people there care about the minority rights.
To a degree, I think that's true. I think there's deeper questions when maybe it comes to like Native Americans and stuff like that. Like, at that, probably maybe sortition isn't going to produce the best results right now, to be honest. But like,
are we saying that as communists that we don't have any constitution?
Good one. Are we still constitutionalists? Do we believe in a socialist constitution? I used to think I did. I don't know.
This is a deep problem here, is that we have, small democratic experiments, big kind of bourgeois republics, and we have kind of stuff that didn't work very democratically that was called republics, like North Korea. And that's kind of that's the body of stuff that we're working with. This is where Kautskyism, and even, Martov, the Soviet internal opposition that ended up loyal to the Reds. But before the October Revolution was like, no, we don't need to overthrow, constitutional government. What else are we going to fucking do? Like, there's a whole Marxist tradition that's like, oh, no, don't overthrow the Constitution. I mean, yeah, let's get a constitution, but no, don't overthrow it. Maybe we can like amend it and work with it. Marx said stuff about this, right? Yeah. No, don't overthrow it for, direct democracy. Because what if direct democracy doesn't work? Then what will happen? You'll probably get something worse than constitutional government. Like, and so however we feel about like the Kautskyist tradition that ends up being like, fuck Soviets, fuck direct democracy, fine. We just go to the fucking parliament for the rest of my life. Like, however dismal those horizons are, do we have a better answer here? Like, what is our response?
But like, why is it not possible to combine forms, as in constitutional sortition, whereby you can decide on stuff, but you've got constitutional norms, and if people object, they can bring it to a constitutional referendum or something like that. Surely it's easy to combine these forms.
I'm not saying it's not. It's just that, you know, I don't see proposals for this. The degree that I see proposals for it, maybe from like the CPUSA or something. I mean, it doesn't look all that great. Like, or maybe even if the policies on paper were fine, like, I don't know, like it doesn't seem to like take into account how, I don't know, all this radical bong rip, extreme democracy and radical critique. Like, how do we incorporate that into this? Like, participatory economics is like something that tries to do this with the economy, and everyone makes fun of it because it sounds like hell, right? But
it really does. Like, it's like if my entire life was fucking faculty meetings, that's what that would be.
But like, you have to read that stuff with maybe, I don't know,
a pinch of salt.
And as well, all human experience prior is what you're trying to tell me to do. Like,
no, but like, think of that as like a thought experiment. Like, okay, now that we've reflected on that, like, what do we don't like about it? And then, okay, fine, that's a dumb proposal. What's a better proposal? Like,
okay, so like even Cockshott basically advocates some kind of constitutional form and towards a new socialism, right? Like, he has different deliberative bodies and different branches of government that would be given some kind of constitutional legitimacy. Doesn't get too far into the constitutionalism, but I do not see how his scheme could work without it.
Yeah, I mean, I the thing is, we all kind of need that sort of formal limitation to hold things down. Otherwise, we don't have, like, how do you centrally plan without a deliberative body?
Yeah, no, I mean, like,
I mean,
so from what I remember, there is
for Bodega. Maybe that's what we need to do. Is just
right.
You could just have a computer do it. I'm pretty sure.
Bleep loop. Problem solved.
Fixed. Bleep bloop. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Oh my god. If only we had some kind of a.
Seriously though, like, even in given my experiences in like small communities, like, having a constitution is a good idea.
Agreed.
And like, maybe you have a jury that decides on its application, but there should be a constitution.
Correct.
I mean, what are the alternatives to a constitution?
I have one.
Why do you say that, Kyle?
No constitution.
The dictatorship of the proletariat's not a constitutional government, though.
Yeah, that's
It
like,
could be.
it's.
You can make a constitution of it. You can just say, fuck you, bourgeoisie, you're not getting a vote. Everybody else does.
The start of the Soviet constitution's like, yeah, we killed those bourgeoisie, didn't we?
Well, I mean, we're lucky about this, but again, that opposition leader Martov, after the October Revolution, look, he was in favor of keeping, you know, the old constitutional government, but, you know, especially because, you know, he's Jewish, and, you know, this is during the Russian Civil War, where the White Army becomes like Tsarist Black Hundreds. So he's like, okay, I'm siding with the Reds.
Unlike half the other fucking Mensheviks who side with the blacks, which is the whites, which is crazy.
I mean, honestly, you know, it seemed like a great deal more of the Mensheviks. This is a vast minority of the Mensheviks were, you know, as where Martov was. And I think it was, you know, driven by his social being as a Jew, and you know, like.
Well, also a lot of the other Mensheviks liquidated in the Bolsheviks priorly too, like Trotsky.
Yeah.
For example.
No, like a lot of the, no, for sure. But like, he was very serious about constitutional government and, you know, sort of like being against the death penalty, but could not stand by what the other Mensheviks were becoming. And because of it, he ends up entertaining basically like, okay, look, I just want some kind of like, you know, I just want some kind of like theory of what would be a good constitutional form. Maybe we could like have like a Soviet democracy, and we could even exclude the bourgeoisie. So he comes up with a theoretical sort of class dictatorship of the proletariat that would be like a, you know, a form that would integrate like the bourgeois constitutionalism that he wanted, you know, basically from the Constituent Assembly, and elements of the Soviet, of the workers' councils and the Soviets. So this was like something that people were thinking about and chewing on. I mean, it's not much of a sketch. I mean, it's not much more than a sketch there. But like, when I get through McNair, it doesn't really lead me to Kautsky. It leads to that moment in Martov to me, you know, where someone is like, okay, I see like why that went like it did, but that direct democratic experiment doesn't work by itself. What do you take from this? You know, how do you, with all these lessons, do we have anything positive to say?
So you're trying to stop me from becoming Kami Sulla, is what you're saying.
Could you unpack that a little bit?
So, you know, I just like seize control. Like I just like become dictatorship, and then like we get rid of all my enemies, and then all the enemies of the people, and then like I retire to my farm and like let society restart again after we've eradicated everyone, and then you can figure out if there's a fucking constitution. So you're trying to talk me out of that, right? Like,
yeah, more or less. I mean, like, you know, like that's
you might get to live.
Might not.
Well, we haven't talked about Tom. Tom still got his plane ticket, but maybe you convince me. I don't know. I mean, I actually do like. What I like in McNair is the idea of like socialist constitutionalism and what would that look like. So, what is an international republic like?
Yeah.
How do you balance democracy? But I do actually think Sortition does fix some of the problems that I do have with party dominance in McNair, and I think that's a real problem. I don't think anyone really addresses it.
We should read some of the stuff on Sortition that's in here. You know what I mean? Like, because, and the stuff about Aristotle. I don't know. Do we think that's worth it? Would that just hold us up? Like,
well, I think this is going to come up again when we talk about the Brumaire. I think it will. Like, I think like it maybe, you know, like, I don't know.
But nobody says it clearer than Cockshott, honestly. You know, with all the things slagging him off for being a Stalinist that might be using extreme democracy arguments for duplicitous reasons or something. I actually just haven't found a better version.
No, I'm going to give Cockshott the benefit of the doubt. I believe that he does seem to think that like that he's a Stalinist, but like he actually does seem to like some kind of democratic apparatus because he thought that's a problem. He does think that's a problem in Stalinism. He's just like doesn't want to critique all the other parts of Stalinism.
No, I know. I don't actually think he's duplicitous about this. I just think it's sort of built into the thought. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, me too. Sorry,
there is some more stuff here that he talks about, which I kind of, you know, made me think. This is one on about, he talks about abstention as opposed to not going into government. Where he's talking about being MPs. You would have to constantly challenge the legitimacy of an elected parliament. Your victorious candidates would have to follow the example of Irish Republicans in refusing to attend and thus add legitimacy to the elected parliament. You might consider the Irish Republican policy of combining legal with the legal struggle. But it is interesting, like, if you had a large movement and you won, like, you know, 20%, 50, 40% of the vote, and you didn't send any of them into parliament, that could also delegitimize the bourgeois state in a way. That's what the Irish Republicans are doing. Like, half of the MPs in Northern Ireland, they don't sit. And they haven't done for 30 years, 40 years. So all those seats that would actually make maybe a left majority in Britain, they haven't done anything. Like, there would literally probably be a left majority in Britain now if you had the Irish Republicans in the parliament, like the Scottish Nationalists. So it's another interesting, I think that's an interesting idea for a related strategy.
Yeah, and it brings to mind, you know, what if not for, you know, elections in this government, then what is a party for? you know, like, which isn't necessarily a deflationary argument. The Irish Republican Party. Look, I mean, it might be for armed struggle. Okay, like that's that's what some of the Irish Republican stuff is about behind the scenes. That's, you know, part of what
Well, not
Cockshotts is
anymore.
about. Not
They-
anymore.
I mean,
But
that's
like,
what they started about,
but they still don't sit.
yeah, they still
Yeah.
even though like it would fix some problems right now if they did. I mean, there are costs to that strategy.
no. There are, and I guess what I'm bringing up is that there are historical reasons why Irish republicanism could form political parties, you know, and not participate, was because they had other political activities in mind, and most Leninism, you know, is as parties of activists, you know, like, it's not just parties of activists in this abstracted McNair sense. They were like, you know, combat organizations, right? And that's what that was the animating principle. And if that's not your animating principle anymore, and you're able to maintain an abstentionist sort of policy for a party, which, you know, I don't know, where else is there something like that? A big political formation that has, you know, a party structure that isn't doing armed struggle and isn't doing like just, you know, party politics and
There are the only other example I can think of is temporal. It's not strategic like
right,
like the Irish, and that is like when the leftists and liberals in the Iranian parliament abstained. But that ended up being strategically kind of a big damn mistake. So
but that's like tactical. Those are tactical abstentions. It's very rare that you get a strategy of, you know, a strategy of not just you know, organizational independence, but abstention. Like this, it's kind of like a pure left com strategy in a way. Like, of, we're going to maintain party structure. We're not like going to pop off the rev right now, chief.
And we're actually even going to participate in elections, then just not sit. Like,
right. Yeah, we're going to, you know, we're going to do like civil disobedience using your party structure because it's not, or using your electoral structure because it's not fair, because it's not really democratic. We want to demonstrate this in meaningful political action. Like, you just don't really see this. That is a sui generis thing, as far as I can tell, and it's an example to learn from, but it's there for a historical reason, I guess. Like,
yeah, the only parties that I can think of would do it are armed parties.
Like, ex-armed parties.
Yeah, ex-armed parties, and they started it when they were still armed. So,
but you know, maybe I don't know. I don't know what the activity is.
Actually, they really did do that. Like, even though they were illegal, they did try it.
The Tsar wouldn't let them.
Right. So,
Can we read these bits here? I think like McNair has got some. He certainly goes Cockshott certainly goes more towards the social than McNair ever does in the book, in these paragraphs. Let's have a read of some of this. You should be demanding a constitutional convention drawn by lot from the population to redefine the state structure. You should be educating party members in the goals of revolutionary democracy, so that if such bodies drawn by lot come into existence, then any party members who randomly find themselves allotted can come to play a leading role in the citizens' jury. The party members would have to be prepared to argue intransigently in a constitutional convention for the most radical and egalitarian structures. You would have to be prepared at time of major crisis or political scandal for the people themselves to take the initiative in forming such a convention drawn by lot. I think all that's good. It goes on, which is, I think, something that McNair doesn't say too much about. You have to argue in the trade unions movement that only by raising labour's goals above the economic to the political could labour be free. Yeah? Something McNair doesn't talk about. He goes further. That's bringing the economic to the political. And here he goes to the social. Within the labour movement, you could... wait, now. Is this the one? Sorry, 1 second. Within the labour movement, you would have to be arguing for the abolition of the wages system in concrete, practical terms, explaining the relatively simple steps, that a democratic assembly could take to achieve these goals. The struggle over wages and conditions is not enough to abolish the wage system. We must first win the battle of democracy. I think this emphasis on the economic that he puts here is very missing from McNair's.
Agreed. Totally agreed. I mean,
Hallelujah, amen.
I mean, like I hated the fact that I was so pissed off at this essay in the first half. In the second half, I was like singing Shaft Blast's praises, like Hallelujah, Shaft Blast. Like,
Oh,
Yeah,
dear.
right there with you, Derek. But it goes to a deep ambiguity in these sort of debates. I don't know. I never like. It's been tremendously dissatisfying reading around recently because no one's ever really like. Very few people that I've been reading are like 100% wrong or 100% right. Basically, and even people whose like politics that I'm so disturbed by. It's really disturbed by. I find Shaft Blast politics disturbing. You know, like it's just it really it makes me feel like that brains are modular. It's what it makes me feel like. I don't know.
People are functions of their conditions, aren't they? And everybody's conditions kind of messed up rubbish in them, can't they?
And
guess
their genetics too, and you know, epigenetics.
And the genetics. But that should be pretty easy to solve with a simple neural network.
But also there's like the epigenetics of your parents too.
That's true.
So I mean, yeah, it's like the function of your parents' conditions and your parents'
Heritability
and the genetics.
Heritability
Epigenetics.
is more useful to talk about it because not even just epigenetics, like general heritability, because a lot of social stuff is passed down.
Yeah, it's true.
I think Lamb says that.
Yeah.
Did you read that book, Derek?
I'm reading.
Labs-
It's on my. I right now I'm reading like 5 books at a time, very slowly. And I'm.
Is that one of them?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Jablonka and Lamb, Evolution in 4 Dimensions.
I'm reading Evolution in 4 Dimensions. I'm reading a bunch of histories of 1848. Like I'm really digging down into that. And
Yeah, I was like, when I was reading Jablonka and Lamb, I was like, I only read the genetics and the epigenetics part because I'm like, what? This is like not physical. But like, I don't know. I don't know what their argument is for like, you know, I'm like, how can something like.
How can behaviors be passed down?
Yeah, I'm like, you need to give like a physical explanation of this. Like,
No, their argument is that it's like
what is the behavior? Like it's like it has to be accounted for physically. Like I didn't like
yeah, teaching is a physical act, yo.
Like visual inputs, audio inputs.
I know, but it's like
well, like
Yeah, I'm back to the engineers again.
no. Behavior is the only. All right, we're way off track. But the only one of those dimensions that isn't physical is the symbolic, which has a place in human intentional action. Like,
it is physical.
I know it's
on
physical, but it's
neurochemical level, whatever. But it doesn't.
I don't think they systematized like.
I think that's probably fair that it's not systemic enough, but I wouldn't say it's not physical enough. Like it's just not. Yeah. They get loosey goosey in the second. Like I've just skimmed over the last 2 parts. I'm going to sit down with it sooner, but yeah.
Right.
But I mean, I think we have to deal with like one of the things that I'm almost going to sound like a fucking plat, and I'm sorry, but one of the things that we have to deal with when we're dealing with
one last word. That's a really good book, though. Okay.
It is.
Yeah.
That's like the best book on biology, I think.
But because we live in contradictory times and contradictory people, and we have contradictory material circumstances, and the loose sense of contradiction, not in the analytic sense of contradiction, before someone gets all analytic shamey on me. Looking at you, Lexi.
I'm not. I know exactly what you mean. McNair uses contradiction in the same way.
Right, I know, but I know how it makes analytical Marxists cringe.
Yeah, but it's from sociology. It's because what's his face tried to do a non-Marxist theory of history and used it and got like some like I don't know limey prize for doing it. What's his name? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Anyway,
Let's wrap this up. Does anybody have any points to make?
I'm actually just saying my last thing is I think we need to like take the contradictions within the socialist movement a lot more seriously when we analyze it. And I'm going to end on praising both McNair and Cockshott, which you like a little bit for this and this exchange, is it really pushes on some tensions that go all the way back and they're never resolved. They aren't. I mean, like, I think we have to be honest that they're not resolved. And if they were resolved, we wouldn't be here. So,
I don't think so. I think we'd still be here if they were resolved. No, genuinely, because I don't think that communism or socialism would have worked given the material conditions, even of, probably the 1920s.
Well, yeah, but
I think it's more likely to work now. But I think that even if they had the right strategy in Marx's time and all that, it wouldn't have worked.
Well, okay, I can actually agree with you on that, but I think my thing is you couldn't even come up with the right strategy until some of these things are like materially dealt with. Like, there's no way to I don't know that there's a way to totally preemptively know what you would need to do. Like, I don't think this is solely a thinking problem, and this is this is my like now 10-year debate with Douglas Slane is actually in this statement. Like, you cannot preemptively think your way out of a social system. Otherwise, you get into like Adorno, like despair. I think because you'll always think yourself into impasses because you can't see the material conditions changing because there's some stochastic elements.
Yeah, and like you say, Derek, and I totally agree. The capitalists didn't invent capitalism. The fucking thing just kind of evolved and happened and smashed and barged its way through. And that's a similar thing. But like, it's not to say that they didn't strategize, but it's, you need to strategize, but you're not going to get everything right. You're not, this prefigurative notion of Owen and these. It's the same problem we have today, isn't it?
Yeah, we need to be practical about this. There's a lot of political strategists that know you can't do all that, and they, I don't know. It's not so novel outside the Marxist tradition. Just we're used to feeling like, because we have a sort of earlier lens of social science, maybe, that we could predict more than we can. And so when we figure out that, the owl of Minerva flies at midnight or whatever, then we kind of give up on, using knowledge that all. And I don't know. I hope eventually out of these like extended debates, there will eventually be some kind of, pragmatic cash value for people that look at me and go, okay, if you don't want me to be in like a theory in like a Lenin worship cult and then, do trade union activism, what should I do? I mean, I can't convince some of these people that trade union activism is different than being in a Lenin cult. You know what I mean? Like, but
I don't know. I can definitely see how it pays me more.
Yeah. I think it is different. And like, it's not enough for them to do trade union stuff for some reason. They want like some political, they want a political kind of orientation that they can take as, agents. Like, and yeah, I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what to tell people like that, other than, don't get into a cult. Just join a religion. It'll hurt your trade union activism less.
Kyle.
I guess where I come out of this is that, given the sort of political mood that we're in right now, it's a lot of discontent. There's a lot of resentment of politics. I wonder if the argument for the Democratic Republic is better served by some of the proposals that Cockshotts making at the end here. Because I think that these kind of latch on to like actual concerns that people have today. Whereas McNair's arguments feel, like, at least to me, they feel like a lot of kind of like fiddling with the details of government as I know it, more than really making substantial changes that address people's like distrust and hatred of the political class and of the bosses and of the capitalist system. So I kind of wonder if, like, taking up some of these proposals, we might have something that would be a little bit more usable in these circumstances today than what we got at the end of McNair. I think the main issue for me would be saying, okay, like Cockshott has these kind of like strategies and proposals. Those are great. Could we maybe link those up with some of the strategic concerns that McNair brings up about like continental blocks and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I guess I find this like, oh yeah, I could go talk to people about this and they'd think it would be pretty weird, but I don't think like, so you look at something like XR and like they have like a sortition orientation, right? And that seems to be like the part of their program that's receiving the least attention. But there have been examples of sortition being used, like in the last 20 years to decide sort of issues of public importance. And I mean, I think it could enter the political discussion.
You're talking about Extinction Rebellion. It has a sortition part of its proposal. I've never heard of that.
Yeah. It wants to do I don't know if they still have this position, but when they started out, they wanted to create a sortition-based body in order to make recommendations to Parliament about what needed to be done, and then just like use the weight of moral authority to push Parliament to do them. So, I feel like this stuff could kind of be in the conversation and might actually have some purchase with people given the sort of like anti-political sentiments that we have today. I just don't know if the way that XR is presenting it is really going to be the most constructive.
So this is our official wrap up. How do we think of, like, what final thoughts on the whole McNair series? Because this is the last of this series. We're going to be starting soon enough one on the 18th Brumaire. How do people feel about the whole experience of going through this? I know
it was a long 4 episodes.
The long march through revolutionary strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I started off, trying to figure out, kind of why the McNairist thing got so weird, but I didn't know how weird things were gonna get, basically. And I don't know. This was pretty eye-opening. Like, I'd like to think I've learned something, but I think I just need to like chew on it a bunch, basically. Like, ultimately, yeah, I feel like I've raised more questions than I have answered, even though there's a useful analytic at work here. I
feel like I need to go back through history a lot more than I was going to before, and look at the genealogies of these things, but also look at all these things that we're missing and these sub-movements that didn't happen. Not because I think they're going to contain the answers, but sometimes they bring up more interesting questions. You think of Martov, you think of a lot of American movements that we've just forgotten about. Like, we just pretend that there was no left in America before like the the SPA and stuff like that. And that's just not true. So like, I think this was really eye-opening to me to go back through for my 3rd time. But even though I think I became much more hostile to it through the process of engaging with it than I even expected, I knew I was going to be skeptical, but like towards the end, I was like, fucking McNair. Like, but I really appreciate the book.
Yeah, like, I think a lot of people, that might have seen my engagement with this book might have, I guess, thought of me as a straightforward McNairist. And I think I, would sometimes read him in an autonomous way that maybe he doesn't even mean. And I basically think that he's like a really interesting foil for whatever's coming next. Like, and I don't know. We're probably better off for having like engaged with this stuff. Like, I think we are. Like, but as for like how much I can advocate this, it's highly qualified because of what it's missing. And and it's a good, like, what Cockshot says about it in the beginning is apt. It's a big step forward from let's just join up with the Democrats. Yeah. And or let's not do anything at all. But as far as like taking the conversation much further than that, you have to get more complicated than this.
Puya.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I thought the book was alright. There was I think he has good politics, but sometimes I wish like sometimes like some of the stuff he says is like you want a little more.
There you go. That's Puya. A few words. The word probably a few more times.
Yeah, need material. And what other words would I like to see more?
Concrete
material conditions, economic development, labor,
prices,
social.
That's a good one.
Equalization,
fallen rate of profit. Well, I must say I really enjoyed doing it. I think we learned a goddamn lot reading it. I think there's definitely large portions of his strategy we all agree with and take away. We probably feel that it's not enough, but hopefully with the different season or reading group series together, we'll start forming some kind of something or other. What do people think? Is there a synthesis?
So I guess like my general thoughts about revolutionary strategy are so I came to this book feeling a lot of disillusionment with social democratic politics in Canada, and especially in Alberta. And the situation in Alberta just seems to get worse and worse. And I guess like where I stand on this point or on this book is that like, again, yeah, it's that kind of cart before the horse problem, right? Like, I feel like I don't really understand the material and political situation in this province well enough to actually like even begin to say what parts of this would be valid here. What parts of this could like I start to advocate in a useful way, as opposed to just saying like, here's the minimum program. This is like proven out by socialist history. Let's just stick with that. Like I feel like that's just too doctrinaire. And I guess what it leaves me with is a desire to better understand my circumstances so that I can evaluate how I actually feel about its practicability. Yeah. Because I think this has been said multiple times, but it feels like it's kind of often an abstract zone of historical extrapolation and thought that often feels like it could be suggesting a new point of view on your circumstances, but it's really hard to say because it is, again, quite alien from, say, just your common discourse about social democratic politics today. There's a lot of reconciliation work that needs to be done there.
Well, I must say that like the series has got a lot of positive feedback from listeners and patrons and stuff like that. So I think it's definitely been worthwhile. I thought that we're going to be going on to doing the Brumaire soon. And somebody just sent me a tweet about how Karl Marx's death was reported in one of the Irish newspapers in, what year was it? 1886? Anybody?
Off the top, not sure.
I'm guessing it was off. He had some serious debt.
83.
83. Here we go. Do you want to read? This is funny. The Avenir Liberal announces the death of Karl Marx, the chief of the International Society. The next sentence then, that's all it says. It goes, notice, report of Dr. Arthur Hill Hassel, analyst of the Laurel Sanitary Commission, author of Food and Its Adulterations, etc., on Myers semolina. And then there's a long thing about semolina. They contain a very large percentage of nitrogenous matter, chiefly gluten, and are far more nutritious than any other food, such as arrowroot, tapioca, sago, corn flour, farinaceous food, ordinary wheat flour, or any of the cereals in use as food in this country. Signed, Arthur Hill Hassel, MD, Lunding. Highly recommended by the faculty for infants, invalids, and etc. It makes delicious puddings, custards, blancmange, etc. After a trial no family will be without. Myers semolina. There you go, everybody. Karl Marx and Myers semolina. Fucking hell.
Is that physical enough in terms of Marxist analysis?
Marx, the person Karl Marx is only a social abstraction, really.
Who had the most influence? Let's see if we can find Myers semolina. Let's see if it still exists. Oh man, that is good.
Oh, echoing
Who's
throughout the
Myers
ages.
semolina?
I don't know.
Okay.
Probably not the author of the most important, like, secular, writing of all time. The most influential secular writing of all time.
Here's a clip from the Freemason Journal of June 3rd, 1871. Here we go. Myers semolina. Anybody see that?
Oh my
God!
You go. I do see it.
They got around,
Look at all those prize medals.
It won 24 prize medals. Let's read a little bit more. The manufacture of Myers semolina was established in 1815. It's the oldest and the largest in the world. 25 million pounds being yearly produced. Shit, man, that's a lot. Our semolina is a staple fruit in France, Russia, Spain, Italy, etc., and will still be that of England. No, Karl Marx, the famous internationalist, has just died. Going forward. No, I'm joking.
What you're saying is that we didn't read the Aristotle, but or the Conditions for Extreme Democracy that Cockshott put out there, but we did read 3 paragraphs on Myers semolina.
It was really fast, actually. Like, once you just start talking about semolina, then the reading series just goes.
It just goes down smooth.
I thought you were going to say something about the 18th Brumaire, though, Tom.
No, I just like. I think we should have a Myers semolina reading group series. I think that's the future.
Okay. I don't think I need to spend my weekends doing that.
Kyle,
I could be eating Myers semolina instead of just talking about it. Praxis, baby.
Well, do we want to at least man, this is way too late. But McNair had, what he said about was what he listed as extreme democracy, and then Cockshott gave his version. Those would have been fine things to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What, instead of doing the whole breeding group series?
No, I just mean we've made a habit of reading things out. And look, so Cockshott says, what does McNair give us as the political measures necessary to achieve this extreme democracy? And then he quotes I guess he's paraphrasing McNair, maybe quoting.
Where is this now? Can I get up on the screen or?
Yeah, I have this on page 6 of my PDF.
Yeah. Email it to me. Put it in the chat or something. Up.
Yeah, I mean, if you just search for extreme democracy, you'll find it. Yeah, I'll put it in the chat. Hold on.
Extreme democracy.
Yeah.
McNair.
Oh no, I mean it's in the fucking article.
It's in the reading we just did. It's under the Democratic Republic section. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Stop me. Page 6, did you say?
Yeah, it was my page 6.
Okay.
It's in the middle. It's that checklist.
This bit here.
Yeah. What does McNair give us as the political measures necessary to achieve this extreme democracy? Universal military training and service, democratic, political, and trade union rights within the military, and the right to keep and bear arms. Election and recallability of all public officials to be on an average skilled worker's wage. Abolition of official secrecy laws and of private rights of copyright and confidentiality. self-government in the localities, i.e. removal of powers of central government control and patronage, and abolition of judicial review of decisions of elected bodies, and abolition of constitutional guarantees of the rights of private property and freedom of trade. And then Cockshott says, this is striking about what this omits. How are political decisions to be reached in this extreme democracy? He goes into his note about the Federalists and Aristotle, and we could have read that, but we didn't. But let's just go down to, if McNair really wanted to follow the logic of the working class party being the most consistent advocate of democracy, what he should be demanding is the replacement of all parliaments, councils, assemblies, and quangos by juries drawn randomly from the population, the right of initiative and referendum, with taxes and the budget to be submitted to popular vote. She has a footnote about how this can be accomplished easily and securely using telephones. Declarations of war only by popular vote is a subpoint. Next point, full political rights, including the right to elect officers in the armed forces, and abolition of the judiciary and magistracy. Juries to be supreme in courts, no loss of liberty without jury trial.
Yeah.
So I think
I don't disagree with any of them.
No. I think together they make like a pretty good like compound, I don't know, like structural set of suggestions, you know, you might say. Like it's not quite a program, but it's like the raw materials for one, maybe. If you could work any of that out in advance in any meaningful way, which I'm convinced that social science, or, you know, that some kind of political science answer to that is possible. It's just probably going to be more distorted by, you know, the romance of the previous kind of movements than it usually like learns the lessons of those movements, usually gets kind of seduced by the romance. This is some kind of attempt to draw out, you know, the main points, really. Things that aren't just like kind of woundedly protecting some kind of outdated tradition. These things are interesting and important.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah. It's interesting here. He says public officials to be on an average skilled workers' wage. Sinn Féin, the Irish Republicans, they actually, all of their MPs only take the average industrial wage as their wage, and all the money goes into like the party. How many left parties in the world do something like that?
Wouldn't imagine many.
Not many.
Seriously.
Not many.
Jeremy Corbyn doesn't.
Yeah. I think it's not like vanishingly small, but I would say it's definitely a small minority. Yeah.
So this is, you know, maybe like the most practical distillation. Those two kind of groups of demands maybe together, you know, like that's a practical distillation of not just McNair, but then like, you know, these kind of critiques of McNair that are put in here by Cockshott. I just figured it was worth a roundup of those basic points as a sort of summary, because like, you know, a lot of us have broader problems with, you know, Cockshott's political framing or McNair's kind of political fetish or focus. Mm-hmm. But like on paper, we don't have a problem with these principles for the most part. Maybe we could quibble, but you know, we didn't leave time.
Not at all. Like as general principles of like, hey, what do we want in our polity? I would agree with them. The details of constitutionalism, I think, would be a major point to build out, because it's inadequate what's discussed there. But I think there are a lot of points here that are quite unpopular, but are worth debating and arguing for, right? Like, you know, universal military service with election of officers. Like, well, that's pretty far outside of the realm of what's accepted. You know, abolition of copyright, pretty big. abolition of like judicial review of elected parliament decisions, or not elected parliament, but parliamentary decisions. That's an enormous one, because the amount of legitimacy that Supreme Courts have is very, very strong.
Even among the so-called U.S. left.
Yeah.
And especially when you have like progressive decisions that are so, there's so much gridlock around keeping things the way they are that the Supreme Court has to weigh in to make gay marriage legal or something. Like that's,
I mean, there's this point that beer stuff needs to be considered more when discussing polity. Like, I think it's definitely relevant to the form of constitutionalism, right? What is the structure of these bodies? I think that beer stuff's really important there. Because that could be very valuable. I know, like in Canada, like you'd have a really hard time arguing against the Supreme Court on the left because a lot of the treaty process is going through the courts. It's not that the people are going to the courts because they love the courts, but it's that it allows an avenue of political struggle that has no representation in elected bodies at all.
Right. And these things were kind of set up as, bourgeois treaties, and, mostly the nations are like, hey, you want to like follow through on these fucking contracts we signed, you goddamn hypocrites.
Or even if there was no treaty signed and they're trying to figure out what one might be,
Right.
And so, stopping pipelines with court action, like that kind of stuff is real standard on the left. So, and like generally speaking, I guess, there's not a lot of legitimacy in elected legislative bodies. So you kind of have to do like a two-pronged approach to this of arguing against legislatures, but also arguing against, undemocratic judicial rule over the polity, because like that's really kind of neoliberal point, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Handing power over to the judges.
Let's wrap it up. Everybody, I'm crying. This is a very sad time for us all.
This is it. I mean, we did it though.
No, that's not true. That's not
did
true.
it. Like it's over.
It's not actually true, because if I do interview Mike McNair for for some more stuff, we can come back and we can do one more.
I think we should
just play telephone with Mike.
Yeah. No, really.
I have a list. I literally have a list here of, let me see, 32 questions for Mike McNair. Okay, that I've been compiling over the year, literally. And so maybe we'll be good to go.
And he's doing another version of this book, isn't he?
Oh, Christ, let's not go there. Seriously. I'm not having that. Let's not even think about it.
No. I'm just saying that, like, if I was an author and I was doing a second version of a book, I mean, would I want people like us to read it and talk about it for how many episodes? I don't know. But the point is, this is crucial feedback, Mike. This is I want to see like a more robust and kind of like systematic version of this theory, because I think it was one of like the better things that I read, like that was trying to defend even the very basics, or recover anything, the basics of the Marxist, political tradition or whatever. So this is a perspective that I'd like to see stronger, like I want there to be an option for alienated subjectivity, and people that would be radicals or people that would fucking join cults or something. I want there to be a positive option for them, so nihilism doesn't force them to feel like, that they have to join a cult. Because that's what I see a lot of. I want there to be like a positive political option for people that isn't just like that.
Sometimes I feel like I should join a cult.
Yeah, me too. But then I remember, what that shit is like.
Yeah.
Valuable experience.
I think on that final picture,
Trotskyites.
Yeah.
There's the final picture of Mike giving us a nice old glimpse A wry smile. And with that, everybody, we should say goodbye
Hey.
to the chat. The chat
Goodbye.
we have 14 eyeballs on us at the moment.
That's
We've
what's
had
up.
And we love you all.
we'll do all. Let's call them out. Stephen T, Dr. Forbin, Erica Whelan, Stank, always Stank,
Yeah.
Coco, James Knight. Who else? Do we have anybody else? Benjamin Hanshu, the regulars, all these
Yeah.
people who need therapy, need help. Oh man, damp.
That's why we're here.
They need to join.
Constantine.
They need to join a cult.
They do. Maybe we are the cult. Seriously, myself and my mate were going to set up a cult called the Fish People of Atlantis, but it never got off the ground. Now, everybody, that's a true story. Let's go. We'll see us all in the future. So long.
Bye bye. Au revoir.
Au revoir.